Guys, anyway, yes. So,
John will be back soon, I'm sure.
Yeah, hopefully. Yeah, okay. We got everything up and running. Holy cow, good grief. All right, so anyway, the title of the show today is The Earth Definitely Is Flat, Debunking Professor Dave. And the reason that we're doing this today, guys, is Cami and I, of course, Cami usually searches the flat earth searches every week. And ironically, this guy, Professor Dave, who we had never heard of before, came up at the very top of the flat earth searches. And you know how YouTube tries to, put all the Globers up there and all their stuff. And since this guy had, quite a few subscribers, I think nearly 400,000 or something like that, he, got put right at the top of flat earth searches because he's saying the earth definitely is not flat, which I think was quite a surprise for him. Because as soon as it did that, of course, all the flat earthers kind of converged on him, and he had a ton of comments, as a result of it. Most of his videos recently have only been around 1,500, 2,000, maybe 3,000 views, and now he's up to, I think, 16 or 17,000 views on it, something like that. Mostly, I'm sure, because of all the flat earthers coming to visit. But so I went there and I watched it, and I was in absolute, utter disbelief as to what was being shown. It was absolutely insane that, he was saying all this stuff. It was one of the most uninformed opinions and rebuttals against flat earth, if you will, or hit pieces on flat earth that I've ever seen. The guy has obviously not done a single day's worth of research other than maybe at the Flat Earth Society, but he's going to find out today that obviously the Flat Earth Society is a government disinformation site, and we'll be talking about that. But yikes, it was just pretty scary. So I decided right then and there that I was going to say, okay, Professor Dave, you are cordially invited to check out Globebusters on Sunday, where we are going to debunk each and every point of this. And so he's probably here lurking. And if he isn't, if he decides to go ahead and talk, I've given him a wrench so he can't be banned. But supposedly he should be here watching. And then at some point, if he wants to refute our arguments, then we're going to go ahead and let him do that. So anyway, there you are, John.
You're back, John.
Point pick. Okay.
Okay. So yeah, we're going to go ahead and do that. So yeah, obviously we have Jaron with us today and John the Morgaw with us today. And we are also joined by FE Corps President Mike Kavanaugh, who is with us today. It's going to talk a little bit about, I think, the astronomy angle or some other things that he wanted to kind of chime in on. So, Mike, go ahead and say hey to everybody. And don't forget,
hey, everybody.
There you go. All right, beautiful. So, all right, what I'm going to do, I have to reopen all of my flipping tabs, which...
well, I'll ask Mike a question real quick. Mike, will I see you in the Netherlands in September?
Yeah, it's right around the corner for me, so I'll probably show my face there.
All right. It'll be good to say hello.
Absolutely. Well, I'm supposed to pick you up from the airport, if I'm correct.
Oh, really? Okay, good to know.
It's like, you better see me there, then.
I know who to call if I'm stranded there. All right.
Exactly.
So, yeah, that should be fun. I'm also doing the first ever Mount Shasta conference. I think, who else did I see is doing it? Mark Sargent, Dave Murphy, and that's also September. I don't remember the exact weekend. It's the weekend before the Amsterdam conference. So, okay. Just small talk here while Bob gets his house in order.
Yep, I can't believe I had to do that. It's like I was desperately going, where is this coming from? This is crazy.
Well, I don't know
when. I was seeing your arrow move all around the screen, trying to figure out which tab it was.
It's just weird because it kept picking up those same two lines of me saying Bob, I think, and then repeating over and over again. It's pretty funny. But
I kept checking to see if I was muted, and I was, and then I thought Bob kept saying it for a couple of times. I'm like, yeah, I'm muted, Bob. Oh my goodness.
I think Bob was repeated over and over again. But yeah, there's this really weird thing with running live streams that just changed, and I have no idea why they would change it. You used to be able to open up the page that you'd be doing your live stream on and go right away to the bottom and click mute. And now that page populates and it just says down in the lower left-hand corner, waiting for Jeranism or waiting for Globebusters, and then it has a little countdown, but it doesn't give you the option to mute up. So you have to remember as soon as you go live to also go back to that page and mute. And then Bob was saying something about the live page as well. So they've made it a little bit more difficult to get going.
Well, they want to make sure we're on our toes. That's all, keeping us on our toes.
Still, what did our old intro say? Still struggling through Google Hangouts. Oh man, too funny.
Yeah, isn't that the truth? All right. Well, I've almost got them back open. As you can see, I'm sitting here busily opening them. I had a ton of them open. And let's see. There we go. That's going to be... Oh, actually, I've got that one open twice. That's going to be our background. And, of course, got to have the Himawari on there because, Professor Dave seems to think that there's all kinds of pictures from space that are legitimate. So, got to have the Himawari. You got to have Ustream, which is always offline or showing black stuff like that.
There you go.
Got to have the HD version of that. Oh, loss of signal. Gee, imagine that.
And what's so funny is, though, like when he says flat earthers claim that NASA's faking these pictures, but why? What's the motivation? The thing is if you show that they're faking pictures, what difference does it make why? I mean, we could have some postulations, we could make some educated guesses, but I don't think anybody's really going to be able to prove what NASA's motivations are. But if they're faking the pictures, then they're faking the pictures,
Yeah, indeed they are. So,
John, did you ever listen to the interview that Joe Rogan did with Alex Jones and Eddie Bravo?
No, not yet. Was that pretty recently?
Yeah, pretty recently. Just check it out because it certainly is interesting to hear Alex Jones. He starts to refer to NASA as like the real secret government. It's very, very interesting what he gets into, basically saying that they've been able to kind of pull the wool over for years. I mean, he's somebody who believes, Buzz Aldrin, because Buzz Aldrin basically lied to his face and said he went to the moon. So he believes that, but believes that all the footage, which I think is kind of the same line that Joe Rogan gives, which is all this footage is fake, but it's because they really went to the moon. And it's actually a decent storyline. I certainly don't believe it, but it is a decent storyline because it would explain Neil Armstrong basically being a recluse for all those years Neil Armstrong. Did I say Buzz? Anyway, going into hiding because, again, if you had to tell everybody that you were on the moon and all the pictures of you were fake, now I just take that one step further and say that they never went to the moon as well. But it's interesting to listen to, so check it out.
Well, and that's the same sort of thing that Kent Hovind said. Like, because at first he totally believed 100% NASA, but then he changed his position. He's now like, well, they really went to the moon, but they faked the pictures, just in case they weren't able to retrieve the footage or whatever. And that's just absolutely ridiculous. Right. So, they had the foresight to fake the footage just in case they couldn't get the footage back for some reason. But they didn't worry about radiation shielding for the capsule. They didn't worry about radiation shielding for the, the spacesuits themselves.
Right.
But yeah, they faked the footage because they had the foresight to figure that it probably wouldn't make it through the Van Allen belts.
So, So Professor Dave has joined us in the chat. He's out there in the chat, and he's of course saying that we have zero basis to provide photos or videos as evidence for our point of view. We can just say they're all fake. No, we don't just say they're all fake, Dave. We can prove it. We can prove it, and we're going to prove it today. And in fact, some of this video that you're watching right now is a compilation of those fails and fakes. The images that they are showing are clearly CGI manipulated. And again, Dave, why would they do any of this if any of it was real? Okay, the still photos, especially even the one that you posted, from Apollo 8, was a blatant, obvious cut and paste job. It can be proven. And it's, I don't know what else to say to you, but we're going to present a lot of these facts today for you, Dave. And if you are truly a man of the scientific method, then, or scientific, understanding or belief or whatever, you call yourself a man of science, then you will listen to what we have to say and present today with an open mind, because I guarantee you, your video demonstrates that you simply have not looked into this with any amount of scrutiny at all. And this is unfortunate. And a lot of people were asking me today, it's like, Bob, why are you even giving this the time of day? This is so basic. Well, the reason I'm giving it the time of day is A, because you came up at the top of the flat earth searches, and B, your questions are so rudimentary that people, obviously need to get a grasp on what we're saying here. And it's a good review for a lot of people. So if we can present these things and show you that, show you amongst many other people, it's not like we're out to convince you, Dave, especially if your mind is already made up. But, all right, I got to ban this guy because there's a guy that is.
Yeah. And the thing is, we were all there. We were all where he was. We all laughed at this, and that's the trained response. That's why they show you the images of boats going over the edge, and why we were all taught that it's a ancient rudimentary belief, and it was believed by desert wanderers. I mean, this is the reason why these kind of thoughts and things have been put into our minds, and we've shown commercial after commercial that makes fun of the flat earth. If a politician has something to say about another politician, he'll call him a flat earther. There's a reason why that's used, and of course he thinks that it's because it's ancient belief. But we'll get into his video. I mean, there's so many things wrong with your video, not to mention the fact that you think that the heliocentric model predicts eclipses. What a joke when you just go back in time and find things like the Anti-Crepuscular mechanism and so much more beyond that show that, even the guy that Fred Aspernak, who invented the Soros cycle, I think, or at least uses it to predict NASA eclipses. Clearly, those are all from well before the heliocentric model. They predicted eclipses way before the heliocentric model. They knew exactly the place and time that they would happen, and that was on a different belief. But it's easy to say now, oh, well, because of the scientific revolution, now we can predict eclipses. Well, that's ridiculous. They predicted eclipses for hundreds and thousands of years.
Yeah, with the Soros cycle, absolutely. And the Anti-Crepuscular mechanism, which we'll discuss, which was discovered off of Anti-Crepuscular Greece, is something long before they ever thought the Earth was a ball. And we're really tired of the old rhetoric about Eratosthenes, knowing that the Earth was a ball, 2,000 years ago. That's simply not true. And in fact, that has been debunked, and we're going to debunk it again today, just for your benefit, Dave. So, but not only yours, but many of the people that hopefully your followers that have come over and with you to witness what we have to do. So, I'm looking at your comments in there. Obviously, you are automatically on the defensive about this instead of, I hope you just stop and listen, to what we have to present. So without further ado, guys, let's go ahead and start his video from the beginning, and we will start addressing these things point by point. And also, John, I noticed that you also did a video that you released about an hour ago, a video response to this. It was one of your shorter videos, which absolutely amazed me. But today this is going to be much more comprehensive, and so we will do that.
Well, that means John's warmed up. He's already been to the driving range to get ready. All right, can't wait.
Yeah.
Now you're talking about me, John, or other John?
No, you, John. What other
me, John? See, that's what I was thinking. I thought at the beginning of the show you might have been referring to another John. So just so we're on the same page, I am the one and only John on this show.
Yes, that's correct.
True.
Excelente. It makes things much easier. So,
All right. Cool beans. All right, guys. So let's go ahead and hit this, and let's go through these things point by point. Here we go. And you guys can see my share screen okay, right?
I can see it.
I definitely can. Yes, sir.
Okay, beautiful. All right, here we go.
Professor Dave explains.
Throughout this astronomy series, we've learned quite a bit about every object you could hope to see in the night sky, as well as many others that you can't. So how does all of this fit in with the understanding held by the common public? For one thing, just the way that an understanding of chemistry and biochemistry makes it easy to refute things like alternative medicine, the understanding of astronomy we have just gained will make it easy to refute similarly alternative cosmological models. Okay,
so first thing out of the box, we have Dave talking about, we can easily refute, just like, Western medicine now is refuting alternative medicine, right? And first of all, I want to say that astronomy and astrophysics and all of that, Dave, these aren't even real sciences. Okay. Now, you obviously are going to claim that they are, but the reason that they're not real sciences is because the only thing that you can do is observe them. You cannot test them. You cannot do anything to be interactive with them. You cannot generate hypotheses or experiments or anything like that. All you can do is simply observe, because we are not able to go out there into space, or at least, in your belief, only 500 people have ever gone out into space to even try to do this. And essentially, according to your belief, only a few people have actually gone to the moon, and the rest of them are locked in low Earth orbit. So it's not like you can actually get out there into space and, make any proofs. But, you obviously start going in and you want to attack alternative medicine. And, you're one of those people that obviously, I'm sure you probably get a flu shot, but, it is so obvious that Western medicine is falling so far behind the curve that, it's becoming laughable. And the lawsuits that come up on a daily basis, because of pharmaceuticals and medicine. The Journal for the American Medical Association a few years back released its top causes of death, and number 3 was none other than doctors and pharmaceuticals, being of the top 3 causes of death in the entire world. For you to sit there and profess that Western medicine is better than homeopathic or natural type of things is beyond belief. And if it was so great, you wouldn't have things like this that are coming into law. What do we have here? This is a new piece from Natural News, which is absolutely unbelievable. Medical martial law rolled out in New York. Unvaccinated citizens banned from all public places, including schools, churches, malls, sidewalks, public transit, and voting locations, right? In other words, they're saying if you don't take our shots, if you don't take the vaccinations, then you're not going to be able to go out into public, which is absolutely Orwellian, to say the least. And there is so much evidence at this point that shows that vaccines are extremely harmful. They have been proven unequivocally and linked to autism and stuff like that. And no, I don't really want to talk about homeopathy. I said I was going to address every point in your video, Dave, and we're going to. I'm just saying that you start out with utter nonsense right from the get-go, okay? And next to this, of course, we have another article where an Arizona SWAT team smashes a door because a mother took her infant to the doctor, and with a 105-degree temperature, the doctor said, well, you should probably take it to the emergency room. On the way to the emergency room, the fever broke, and they decided not to go. So what happens is the doctor then reports it to Child and Family Services, and then a SWAT team comes and kicks down the door, takes the baby away at gunpoint. This is what Western medicine has turned into, okay? So it's utterly ridiculous, and it's hard to believe that you can even support this nonsense, especially when you can go on TV, you watch TV, you can see these drug companies advertising, oh, do you have a pain in your arm? Take this. Side effects include death, limbs falling off, whatever, terrible side effects. And then the very next commercial is a commercial for attorneys saying, did you take this? Well, you're now eligible for, a cash reward if you had somebody that died from it or whatever. It's like, get real, harshing on alternative medicine. It's just ridiculous.
Yeah. You're glorifying the for-profit business of big pharma, which is just scary because, Bob just described the way that they advertise to people, the direct-to-consumer advertisements, and the United States and New Zealand are the only countries in the world that even allow that. Well, why? It's because the United States is run by these for-profit corporations. They can get away with whatever they want. So, of course, you've got these Western medicine that just basically masks symptoms or covers up your symptoms. So, I mean, I've described it before, but I woke up every day for a long time with a lower backache, never knew why. Yeah, sure, I could have started popping some 600 milligram ibuprofens or whatever a doctor would have prescribed me. But eventually I found a video on YouTube, believe it or not, that, and Dave Weiss said it as well, but talked about inclining your bed five degrees, putting up a king-size bed about 8 inches at the head. And when I did that, within 2 days, I stopped snoring and I stopped having backaches. So again, people may describe that as, oh, that's crazy, that's that's ancient belief, or that's not up to standards with modern medicine, and that's fine. But what really counts is what heals people, and there's naturalistic ways to cure basically everything. But what do? They just keep popping these pills. And again, I've described it before, but every company that's ever manufactured any kind of immunization has stood in court and admitted to fraud. So if you think that's okay to just send your children to these doctors and let them poke them, I don't know how many shots that kids get nowadays. It's like 70 or something ridiculous. It's pretty scary.
Yeah, exactly. So now he's saying, are you guys going to address any of my points?
I thought that we were.
Yeah, that's exactly what we're doing, Dave. Or are you not paying any attention to your own video? All right, let's move on.
Most notably, the present fad, that is the flat Earth model.
All right. Secondly, Dave, this is not a fad. The flat Earth debate has never really died. It has been around for centuries, and it's far from a fad. In fact, a fad would kind of indicate that this was being supported by a ragtag group of YouTubers, when in fact, even mainstream polls are now showing 10 to 15% of the U.S. population, and that's not even including the worldwide population, which has a higher degree of flat Earth believers, is in sincere doubt of the heliocentric ball Earth model, and are declaring outright that they believe that the world is flat. And this includes a large portion of the scientific community. Now, the reason that a lot of these people are not coming out into the open, although we hear from them, is because of what happens when you do. People will ridicule you. You will get fired from jobs. I personally have had this happen, so I know absolutely that this is happening. So, Dave, when you're talking about a fad, that's like bell-bottom jeans. This is something that is going into the tens and hundreds of millions of people, and we are increasing our numbers exponentially every single day. This is why you're seeing flat Earth everywhere. It has become unquestionably the most talked about subject, probably in the history of the internet. And the flat Earth searches prove that. The fact that YouTube has gone to extreme efforts to quash it, censor it, and the mainstream media is in full alarm mode, trying to make fun of it. The whole 9 yards, and not to mention the armies of government trolls that are out there that are being hired to quash this. So fad, hardly. You really need to look into what's actually going on here. All right, let's go on.
There exists a community of folks who believe that, contrary to everything the human species has learned over the past few centuries, the world is not spherical, but is instead flat, and is also the center of the universe. A knee-jerk reaction to this is often one of disbelief and even mockery, but rather than go that route, let's consider this model in a rigidly academic way.
Okay, I'm sorry, but that's a joke. What you have done is far from rigidly academic. And the Flat Earth Society that you showed at the beginning of your video is, in fact, one of those government disinformation agencies that was put in place specifically to make flat Earth look ridiculous by ridiculous theories like the Earth accelerating upwards at 9.8 meters per second squared, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. No legitimate flat earther believes that, Dave, and you are going to be amazed when you find out where that theory came from. Okay, so again, there's your ignorance on point number one, and ignorance on point number one. It's just, and it only gets worse from here, guys. So let's continue on.
Whether the Earth is flat or round, we should be able to demonstrate it and show how all astronomical phenomena make sense in one model versus the other. Let's go through some of these phenomena now and put.
Okay, first of all, astronomical phenomenon does not prove the shape of the Earth. However, as we are going to demonstrate today, the astronomical phenomena fits far better into our cosmological model than the heliocentric model does. Okay? So, the first thing you're trying to do is jump to the stars to prove the shape of the Earth. What you completely neglected in your video, Dave, was the hundreds, if not thousands of tests, photographs, observations, laser tests, interferometry tests, things like this that are proving that the world has no curvature. There is no demonstrable video of that anywhere. We have done tons of tests. We can see hundreds, if not thousands of miles further than we should be able to do. And like I said, the flat earthers have carried out these experiments, and you conveniently did not use any of them. Why? Because they actually prove the surface of the earth is not convex. Okay? Go ahead, John.
I was just going to add really quickly that it is kind of funny that in this video he doesn't even attempt to make a case for curvature or motion of the Earth. It's like somebody that's trying to prove that the Earth is a spinning ball. You would think that he would have at least an attempt to show curvature or geological motion, but yeah, conspicuously absent on that front.
Yeah, and he says, feel free to present those. Okay, well, you know what? We'll do that, Dave. But honestly, there are so many experiments out there that it absolutely defies imagination. They're being done weekly, daily, Dave, and nobody has ever been able to measure, see, or prove any curvature, period. Okay? Gyroscopes can't pick it up. We can't see it. We can't disprove it with lasers. And in fact, all it's doing is proving, the laser tests are proving, and the optical experiments are proving that the surface is flat and has absolutely no curvature to it. But like I said, you have completely omitted all of that, and you went straight to the sky. So great. We're going to go straight to the sky with you, Dave, and we're going to show you what kind of pseudoscience you're using, like Kepler's laws, that you claim that are proving the Earth to be a sphere. But let's move on.
Put them into context. First, let's just look at the celestial sphere. We look up and we see stars and planets going around. The flat Earth model says we stay still while everything goes around us. And the round Earth model says we rotate, which is what causes the apparent motion of objects in the sky. At face value, with no further investigation, these are two completely valid hypotheses.
Okay, well, you know what, Dave? At least you admitted that much, right?
Except for the image here. I mean, the image of the flying pizza in space is not what any flat earther believes, and people like to use that because it looks ridiculous. If you picture that flying disc and then you've got all the other planets and you've got this giant sun, it makes no sense at all. So again, nobody believes that, but you placed it in there as if we believe that this flying space pizza is in some sort of orbit in space, or it's flying upwards like the Flat Earth Society says. It just seems crazy to me that you're so sure of this model over here, yet even your own physicists like Michio Kaku, speaking about cosmology and their current theories, say that they, when compared with experiment, that they're off by 10 to the 120th. And that's the biggest mismatch in the history of science when you talk about theory versus what we actually observe and what experiments show. So you got somebody telling you it's the largest mismatch. Our cosmology is so off that we've had to invent 95% of the observable universe is now the unobservable dark matter and dark energy, yet you'll allow all that. So again, it's just insane to me that you can just overlook these things and simply believe it because it's what mainstream science says, and it makes it very easy for you to just stand there and say how ridiculous this theory is without ever looking into it.
Yeah, it totally agreed. And I would just add really quickly that the spinning or the apparent rotation of the stars and the celestial lights are really the only potential indicator of actual rotation. But are we going to go dive deeper into each one of these topics afterwards, or should we just go ahead and dump it now, like our thoughts now?
Well, we're just addressing it point by point. So if you have something to address specifically to this point, go for it.
Okay, great. And so I'll just throw one single thing out there, and that would be Polaris. Because Polaris, as everybody knows, in the north is central to all the other stars. And that has indeed been the case, as far as we can tell, for as long as history books and as long as astronomy books have been written. Now, the globe Earth model demands that we have a long-term 26,000 year precession cycle of the Earth's axis. Now, 26,000 years is a long time, but if you break that down to, let's say, degrees. So 1 degree of this axial precession takes 72 years. Half a degree would be 36 years, and a quarter of a degree would be 18 years. So over 18 years, we should have seen a misalignment between our axis of rotation, allegedly, and Polaris. And yet, in my lifetime, and again, as far back as, I guess it was Hipparchus and his pupil or whatever, they, since that time, we should have seen, I think, 25 or 26 degrees of this axial precession. And so Polaris absolutely could not be central to all of the other stars for that entire time. Now, the globe Earth proponents say there used to be a different North Star 6,000 years ago, and there will be another new North Star in another 6,000 years, but that's just kicking the can out so far that nobody can observe it in the future. I mean, we're all going to be long gone in 6,000 years, and they put in the past, they put it so far in the past that there are no history books written that long ago. But this is a globe Earth killer because, again, the model demands that we have this axial precession. I'm sorry, but we should absolutely notice, even within 36 years, a half a degree misalignment between Polaris and our axis. That's the globe Earth's dead on just that one point alone.
Yeah, I agree with that. And he's saying, guys, there are direct measurements of dark matter. We just don't understand it. You don't understand astrophysics and particle physics. That's not anyone's problem but yours. Dave, you don't even study your own science. There are no direct measurements of dark matter, for crying out loud. In fact, mainstream physics right now at this point has all but completely debunked it. So you are so far behind the curve, Dave, you don't even know what the hell you're talking about, dude. I mean, oh my God.
They're basically looking there and saying, oh, there's a bunch of stuff missing here. And then he's saying that is direct evidence. You can't just look at something and say, well, there's a bunch of stuff missing here that doesn't match our gravitational equations, so we'll just say it's dark matter. And then to have somebody say, oh, there's direct evidence of it, but it's never been observed. It makes no sense. How do you know?
And how did we, and I guess maybe it's the time delay, but I'm not sure how we got from this topic to that. But let's just say that you've got a sniper rifle pointed at a target that's a quarter of a mile away. If you nudge your arm to where you get a misalignment of a quarter of a degree away from that target, you're going to miss it by a mile, proverbially speaking. And so, but again, how did we go from a simple geometric alignment between Polaris and our hypothetical axis and dark matter? I don't know.
All right. Yeah, that's ridiculous. Well, he says we have no idea what we're talking about. Well, Dave, you know what? We've done several shows on this, and we'd use mainstream sources, professors, PhDs in astrophysics, and you know what? You're just wrong. And so go ahead and make the rebuttal video to us, or prove us that we're wrong, but you can't. You're just way, way behind the curve. But you know what? We're jumping all over the place here. Let's continue forward and get through this video. So here we go.
Either of them could feasibly explain what we see in the sky. Now let's dig a little deeper. What are some details we notice about the celestial sphere and certain earthly phenomena? We experience night and day, alternating periods of light and dark that change over time. We see the ecliptic. This is the part of the sky that traces the sun's path throughout the year, as well as the paths of all the planets. The path of the sun follows a slowly tilting pattern that lasts 1 year. This length of time also outlines other cycles observed on Earth, which we call the seasons. These seasons go a particular way in the northern hemisphere and the opposite way in the southern hemisphere. There exists a phenomenon called the Coriolis effect.
Okay, well, before we get to the Coriolis effect, which, by the way, Dave, cannot be reasonably demonstrated. In fact, the graphic that you're using here about the storms, rotating in opposite directions, does Flat Earth have an explanation for that? You bet we do. But as far as the rest of the Coriolis effect, sorry, it doesn't wash. And, even your instances of snipers having to take Coriolis into account, we have disproven that 1,000 times, and we're going to do it again today. But let's back up just a little bit, and let's talk about... well, first of all, John, why don't you go ahead and address this? Because, again, I've got to get my videos.
Sure.
Okay.
Well, just in talking about the Coriolis effect, which you have here on the screen. Oh, we did. I don't know what happened to that image. But if you put it back up, his video. Oh, you have to look at your... Well, just if you look there, the line going through the middle of the screen, if you picture the sun traveling from the right side of the screen to the left, it would create those same wind patterns above and below it. So... certainly interesting that you think that this is what would take place on a spinning globe. I know that that's what you've been told and taught, but again, it just makes no sense. The atmosphere moves lockstep with the spinning Earth. That's what we've been told, that it moves right along with it. It's got the same inertia, so it's moving with it. And yet you're saying that when projectiles are fired or when things are sent in one direction, that they veer off because of this same atmosphere that's moving lockstep with the Earth? It's crazy.
Yeah, exactly. The globe Earth side of this argument tends to cherry pick arguments when they're convenient for their side and completely ignore the exact same arguments when it is not so convenient for their side. So you're right. Like when you talk about airline flights being sometimes, or at least once ever, identical in duration from, let's say, east to west and west to east, which should not be the case if all destinations were racing east, faster than the speed of sound. The argument for that is that the atmosphere is basically permanently velcroed to the frame of reference with the Earth. But just like you said, Jaron, that when it comes to the counter-rotation of cyclonic forces, they say the opposite of that. They say, no, the atmosphere is absolutely not velcroed to the frame of reference with the Earth. So, I mean, there's a discrepancy there. Now, another big thing about the Coriolis effect, as you mentioned, is sniper rifles, sniper shots. And it's claimed that snipers have to take into account the Coriolis force when firing. But if you read up on this, in the northern hemisphere, or central semiplane, it is claimed that snipers have to account for a right, like going off to the right axial, well, it's not precession, what is it? Drift. It's a to the right drift, regardless of the direction that they're firing. So if you're firing north, the Coriolis force is allegedly going to cause the bullet to drift to the right. West, east, south, or any combination, that's what they claim. But of course, we know that bullets are, or the chambers of the guns are, they've got the spiral grooves in there to force the bullet to have a high velocity spin, and it really does seem as if that's what's going on. Because I've mentioned this before, but if you're standing directly on the North Pole and everything's spinning, then this argument might hold water. However, if you're standing, say at 30 degrees north and firing due west, how would the spin of the Earth cause that bullet to travel to the right? That doesn't add up at all. And I say it doesn't make sense. But of course, you get semantical arguments against that ad nauseum. But it doesn't stack up. I mean, it's clearly due to the rifling of the chamber and has nothing to do with the spin of the Earth.
Right. Okay. So he says, once again, I was talking about storms. Really? Well, there's much more to your claimed Coriolis effect than just storms, Dave. All right. So I'm gonna go ahead. Go ahead,
Bob. Do you have the Earth.null school available real quick?
I do.
Just to show them, just so you can show them, when you're talking about this kind of image here, and then you can kind of draw a clockwise orbit, Bob, in the middle there. And you can see how that this would cause, there you go, if the sun and moon are moving in this, and they're diamagnetic and pushing water, causing tides, and then you've also got these winds that and storms that would have to be what the sun and moon would cause.
Exactly. And that's exactly where I was going to go with that. So, Dave, what we're saying then is in the flat Earth model, which you clearly do not understand, the sun and the moon are way closer to the Earth than, of course, 93 million miles. In fact, they're probably way closer even than 3,000 miles. But, there are other factors that are atmospheric lensing, refraction, all kinds of stuff like that, but we're not even going to go there. But what happens is if the sun and the moon are traveling in between the tropics, okay, which, of course, what is in the middle of the tropics other than the equator, and they are electromagnetic phenomenon like we have been claiming for a long time, then what happens is the atmosphere as well as the water, and the atmosphere, of course, has a large amount of water in it, and water being diamagnetic is pushed to each side of the sun, the sun's electromagnetic field. Okay, that is what's causing the Coriolis effect in our model. Okay, which makes a whole lot more sense than the Coriolis effect, being the reason in the heliocentric on the ball Earth for storms going in opposite sides of the equator. In fact, that is just silly when you think about that. That makes no sense whatsoever. It's ridiculous.
No. We've talked about the jet streams and things that are up there moving 300 miles per hour faster than the Earth spins in the same direction. All that just makes no sense when you start to look at the flat Earth model and understand. And if you go back to his little image that showed, he put kind of a little globe image with, just picture the sun going from the right side of the screen to the left and look at the way that your arrows go. That's, of course, what would happen. Now, if the Earth is spinning, on the other hand, then how are we having 300 mile per hour winds going in the south to the direction of the east? It just makes no sense.
Exactly. So, and another thing, Dave, let me show you a couple things. Now, this is another tool that was taken away from us by the powers that be because of the fact that it basically showed the common sense behind the flat Earth model. And so what we're looking at here is we can look at the Earth and the ocean currents on the Earth or the air currents on the Earth, right, at different altitudes and everything. And isn't it amazing how much more sense these currents make in the flat Earth model than it does in the ball Earth model? Where's the sense of any of this? This makes no sense whatsoever, any of these patterns.
The globe, I think, is the O.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No problem.
Okay.
Yeah. But this makes no sense. With an Earth spinning to the east at 1,000 miles per hour, and yet those red winds are going, 200 miles per hour faster in that same direction. Come on.
Okay, yeah, exactly.
And whatever happened to the claim that the atmosphere is lockstep Velcro to the frame of reference of the Earth? Because, again, that is a necessary tenet of the globe Earth argument, which explains how, again, flights are sometimes very similar in duration, east to west or west to east. Because, if you've got an airplane or a jet that is designed to reduce drag and maximize on thrust, aerodynamics, it is acting independently of the Earth as well as the atmosphere. And so to claim that the atmosphere is what's making the plane beholden to the spin of the Earth, okay, if you grant that for argument's sake, and then look at the Coriolis effect for the counter-rotation of cyclonic forces in either hemisphere, this is a big problem. And I have yet to see any sort of real or cogent argument against this from the globe earthers, except for exactly what Dave just did, to state that we don't know what we're talking about and change the subject.
Right. It's been known for thousands of years. They've tested it. They know that the Coriolis force exists. We hear it all.
Yeah. And the Coriolis force is an illusion. It is as far as on the Earth, it is a fictitious force, and certainly does not actually exist. And I'm gonna play a video that I played last week, or at least a couple minutes of it, that actually demonstrates that quite well. And this is just a little thought experiment for you. But if you ever have known anybody in the military, Dave, then this should make you think, if nothing else. So let's go ahead, and I'm going to play this from what I played last week. And I want you to listen to this and, kind of put this together in your head and see if it makes any sense to you. So here we go.
Drill I want to do to obviate the problem with what they teach about the Coriolis effect. I picked Singapore because it's on the equator. And we know that on the equator, the Earth is spinning at about 1,000 miles an hour. There are a few equatorial cities.
All right, wait a second. No, Dave, we're not trying to claim that it's all caused by magnetism. My God, you extrapolate stuff that is just utterly ridiculous. We never said that. So, you would be better off just shutting up and listening and stop assuming and making claims that we've said things that we have not said. Okay, let's continue on.
Cities, but this is a good one because it's also on the water. There happens to be a lighthouse in Singapore also, which makes an excellent stationary target. This is called the Marina Lighthouse in Singapore within 1 degree of the equator. So let's bring in the shooter who's going to hit this target. Meet Mr. New Jersey. This is one of the biggest battleships ever made. It has a 16-inch gun that can reach 25 miles. I've seen specs that say up to 28 miles, depending on the ammunition, but here's a quick snip of some proof. They're saying that bullet actually goes almost 2,700 feet per second, and here they claim 24 miles. I've seen different ones. The weight of that bullet is a ton. Here's a picture of an old decommissioned barrel with a mock projectile to give you an idea of the size of this gun, because this is what we're going to hypothetically set up as a scenario to hit that lighthouse. Here's one of the projectiles in the magazine tube where it would feed up to the gun, and once it gets up there, they pack hundreds of pounds of powder behind that bullet. It's one of the more impressive guns anyone could ever see fired. When they pull the trigger, the explosion is so enormous that it sounds like it's the end of the world. When you see them fire them off from the air, you can see the decompression of that barrel gas make a shockwave across the water the size of a football field. So you aim at your lighthouse 25 miles away, you pull the trigger, boom, it should fall to the ground, right? Well, not exactly. We got a couple problems with this, and let's use math. 25-mile target from the New Jersey has a flight time of 90 seconds. So you're aiming 90 degrees from the ship straight to the equator to hit that lighthouse, and it takes 90 seconds for the bullet to get there. Problem is, in 90 seconds at the equator, the Earth moves 25 miles. So it takes 90 seconds for the bullet to get from the ship to the lighthouse, but in that 90 seconds, the lighthouse moves 25 miles. So you're going to miss it by 25 miles. Now, those are nice numbers to work with because it sets up a triangle. And you can do a little math to go, well, could I actually lead the target and compensate for the Earth spinning underneath of it like they say you have to? Well, how far is it? A squared plus B squared equals C squared, which will give you the distance of the hypotenuse you would have to use to lead the target at a 45-degree angle. And you'll find that you couldn't hit that target because it ends up being a 33-mile hypotenuse. So you're going to shoot a lighthouse. The ship and the lighthouse move. Even if you tried to lead the target, you're going to fall 8 miles short because the range of the gun is only 25 miles. Think about that, people. I don't think that this ship misses targets. I don't think it's 25 miles off when it shoots at a target 25 miles away. You have to use your brain and just think about some of these things that obviate that they're full of crap.
Yes, exactly. Okay, and so it's not just battleships that do this. The Navy also has railguns that can shoot 100 miles. They do not lead these targets, especially if they're stationary, like a lighthouse or an object on land. The railgun can hit targets 100 miles away, which will take a few minutes for that projectile to get there. They do nothing other than aim directly at these things, and they hit them. Where's the Coriolis effect there, Dave? It's not there. and we're demonstrating nothing other than our inability to understand physics. Okay, Dave, whatever you say, buddy.
Hey, Bob, I put a link into the Skype chat as well as in the YouTube chat, but this is an article from appliedballistics.com because I want to make sure that Dave and the listeners understand that I'm not just making this claim willy-nilly. But according to appliedballistics.com, they say, and this is on page 1 towards the bottom, it says, having a left or right twist will change the direction of gyroscopic drift. Bullets fired from right twist barrels drift to the right and vice versa by the same amount, typically 8 or 9 inches at 1,000 yards for small arms trajectories. Now, going to the section that it's called Coriolis acceleration, says accelerations due to the Coriolis effect are caused by the so-called fact that the Earth is spinning and are dependent on where you are on the planet and which direction you're firing. It breaks down like this. There are horizontal and vertical components to Coriolis acceleration. This is the important part. The horizontal component depends on your latitude, which is how far you are above or below the equator. Maximum horizontal effect is at the poles, 0 at the equator. The horizontal component does not depend on which direction you shoot. Typical horizontal Coriolis drift for a small arms trajectory fired at near 45 degrees north latitude is about 2.5 to 3 inches to the right at 1,000 yards. So just to repeat it, does not depend on which direction you shoot. Now, can anybody make sense of this on the spinning ball Earth, or is it just me?
Yeah, good points, John.
Excellent.
Yeah, very good.
Crazy.
So anyway, okay, but yeah, we don't understand physics. Whatever. All right, so let's go back and let's continue going through this. And as I said, this makes no sense on a spinning ball Earth, but it does make sense with a close and local sun going in between the tropics and the equatorial region, having a diamagnetic effect on the water and the fluid in the atmosphere of the atmosphere itself. Okay, simple as that. Let's continue on.
Whereby rotating masses like storms rotate in one direction in the northern hemisphere and the other direction in the southern hemisphere. Each hemisphere also sees an entirely different collection of stars. These are just a handful of the observations we can make that beg to be explained.
Okay, great. Well, then let's explain them. All right,
So each hemisphere sees completely different skies. So if I'm standing, say at 25 degrees south latitude, and somebody else is standing at 25 degrees north latitude, they both have completely different skies? I don't think that's the way it works.
No,
but
it's not.
But that's the way he said it. He just said, that the north and south hemispheres have completely different skies. But yeah, you can have somebody down in, say, I don't know, Quito, Ecuador, and somebody who's, just a little bit north of that in Mexico, and they would have much of the same sky.
Well, I think it's fair to say that there are unique constellations or unique stars for either hemisphere. But as far as I'm concerned, that is very easily explained by the fact that the celestial plane or the astronomical plane is not really that far away. Triangulation suggests it's about 4,000 miles up, but it could be way closer than that. Now, the astronomical plane is going to obey the laws of perspective. And furthermore, the light coming from the celestial sources are going to be perturbed or bent due to atmospheric refraction. And so the fact that we have unique constellations in either hemisphere, to me, really makes perfect sense on flat Earth when you realize that perspective as well as refraction are at play here. And if you just, Dave, if you just look into this with an open mind, humor the flat Earth hypothesis and give it a fair shake, skeptically revisit the globe Earth hypothesis, which you probably haven't done since you were a toddler, and I actually mean skeptically look at the globe Earth and try to prove it, you'll find that it just falls apart. I mean, it really does. We flat earthers, we're not always flat earthers. It's not like we still believe that the Earth is flat. We were raised on planet Earth, we all were taught about the spinning ball and all of the astronomical theory, but if you actually give this topic a fair shake, skeptically revisit the globe, I can assure you that you'll find that there is definitely something to this. But if you continue to just refuse to look at it, don't really give the topic a fair shake, then you're going to believe that the Earth is a spinning ball forever. But on the other hand, we have actually done the research, and the unique constellations in different locations is not a big deal for flat Earth. I mean, it really does make perfect sense as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, and check out the video I did, Professor Dave. I think it's called "Quotes That Tell Us We've All Been Lied To," and you can see well over 100 quotes from all your favorite physicists that tell you that the model that you now believe in is not correct, or at least was arrived at based on philosophical grounds and not at all based on observations. There's tons of quotes from physicists that will tell you that the easiest explanation is that the Earth was fixed in the ether and that everything else in the universe moved with respect to it. And then they say, but that those ideas were not considered seriously. That they had to stay away from the absolute horror of being in a unique position. That would mean, in effect, that our Earth occupied the omnipotent position in the universe with all other heavenly bodies moving around it. But then you want to throw things like Occam's razor out when that quote that I just read, by the way, was from physicist James Coleman. So if Occam's razor is in play, then wouldn't you go with the easiest explanation and the one that matches all observations, which was the Earth was fixed in the ether and that everything else in the universe moved around it? But again, then he says, but that idea wasn't considered seriously simply because it would place us in the center, and that is an antithesis to science.
Yes, very much.
It was a philosophical decision as opposed to a scientific conclusion. That's absolutely right.
Absolutely.
Right. And so one thing that the Globers seem to be woefully ignorant of, Dave, is perspective, how the eye works, how vision works, how our eyesight works. And the fact that we do not have infinite vision, we cannot see forever. In fact, we have what the flat earthers are calling a personal atmospheric dome, okay? And we're about to get to your question here in a minute, Dave, about where the stars go when they set. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and play this here for a couple minutes, but what we're describing here, a personal atmospheric dome, is essentially the limits of our eyesight as we turn around, look up, down, and to the sides, because we understand that we cannot see forever, and also the fact that when things move away from us, they do not move away from us, and we do not perceive them in an orthographic type of view. We perceive them as converging to a point on the horizon. In other words, things above us will converge down, and things below us will converge up. Okay? And this is a fact of perspective, pure and simple. So I'm going to go back to this, and we're going to let another flat earther discuss this a little bit. I'm going to play a couple minutes of this, and this will give you an idea of what's going on with the personal atmospheric dome and how it applies to our quote-unquote celestial sphere. Now, one thing you need to understand here is the flat earthers believe that the stars are also close and local, and they are rotating above us in the luminiferous ether, okay? And that, by the way, is something that has not been debunked. In fact, many scientists to this day still absolutely acknowledge it. In fact, the majority of them do, believe it or not. They simply explain away it and its properties with the Lorentz Fitzgerald contractions. In other words, they explain it away mathematically, and certainly not observationally. But let's move on to this, and you can understand a little bit more about how this personal atmospheric dome works. Here we go.
Perspective vision, which is about a 12,000 mile diameter circle or 6,000 mile radius. That's all the stars we can see. And the stars lower to the horizon at the edge of that circle, of a 12,000 diameter circle. So as you move, this dome of stars moves with you, or your dome of vision, I call it. Anyway, let's check it out. Well, just like, let's say you're standing at the North Pole, right? And the stars rotate. You have Polaris overhead, and the stars are rotating around you counterclockwise. As you move south, Polaris starts to lower in the northern sky, and the stars start to tip. It's almost, I like to think of it as like a salad bowl, right? And so the salad bowl has the bottom is up, that's where Polaris is, and the rim of the bowl is on the ground. That's also where the sun would go around, from your perspective at the North Pole.
right, skip forward here a second. Okay, P-Brain, start talking.
I thought it was just
so as
me.
you head south, the solid bowl starts to tip onto its side, and so that, let's say you travel 3,000 miles south of the North Pole, everything would be rising in the northeast, sweeping out over the southern sky, and setting in the northwest.
Okay, now, just as a side note, Dave, we get very often a question of how an equatorial mount telescope could possibly work on a flat Earth, right? Obviously, you understand how an equatorial mount works. I hope you do. And we certainly do as well. In fact, I'm kind of an amateur astronomer. I have a very nice little Meade LX200 10-inch telescope with the AutoStar system. Had it for about 16 years, so I certainly understand what's going on, at least from an amateur's point of view. But what I want to point out is using an equatorial mount, which the Globers will say is absolutely impossible on a ball Earth. I'm going to give you a little bit of an example of exactly how that works. As you know, with an EQ mount, they are calibrated either to Sigma Octantis or a Polaris, right? And when you do that, then calibrate it towards, here's Polaris, and Sigma Octantis would be back here. At that point, then you can set that EQ mount to track any particular star. Okay, so same thing. Because of the fact we are using a personal atmospheric dome, or this is the way that perspective works, and it can be proven, every way but Sunday. And this, by the way, is also something that is not taken into account in the heliocentric model, which is another huge fallacy. But so if we calibrate that EQ mount on this north Polaris star, and then we track a star, what happens is that EQ mount
miles south of the North Pole
will follow any one of these stars up and then back down on the same axis. Okay, so that is how that would work in the flat Earth model. And again, we're not making stuff up here. The personal atmospheric dome and the way that vision works is absolute scientific fact. And if you are a scientist, then you should know about this. And if you don't, then you need to study up on it. It's not like we're making these assertions willy-nilly, Dave, because we're not. There is an enormous amount of research that has gone into this. And you have to understand the differences in the two models before you go spouting off things like you have in your video. Okay? Any other comments, guys, before I move forward?
Well, I would just really want to emphasize the personal atmospheric dome is something that's subjective and variable. We do know for 100% certain that the atmosphere will cause light to refract in a varying, number of directions, depending on, the temperature, barometric pressure, all these different variables. But this personal atmospheric dome causes light to behave as such that it is not always traveling in perfectly straight line or rectilinear paths, which was the assumption, starting with Eratosthenes, who allegedly estimated the circumference of the Earth using the sunlight and the shadows, all the way through Christopher Columbus. And refraction wasn't even acknowledged by science until the 1600s. Now, what should have happened is all of the values that were gleaned from, triangulation and like Eratosthenes' method, those values should have been revisited and completely overhauled. However, until now, that's never happened. So thank goodness for flat earthers cleaning up after science's mess.
Yeah.
And their ignorance.
And the ignorance. Okay. All right. Let's get back to it. Okay. So cycles of night and day. Okay. I particularly like this part, what he's going to say about that. Let's move forward. And sorry for the volume on this, guys, but, Dave's video is a little bit low and I can't really amplify it. So here we go.
Here is where the round Earth becomes obvious. All we have to do is understand that the Earth is roughly spherical, spinning on an axis tilted somewhat from the vertical, and going around the Sun, just like all the other planets. This singular assumption.
Notice the key word there is assumption, because you have no proof of these assumptions whatsoever, Dave. You know it, and we know it.
Right. And like, it's so funny because what he said was a complete contradiction in one sentence. Something does not become obvious after lots of mental gymnastics and assumptions. Either something is obvious or it isn't. So just wanted to put that in there because, oh my goodness.
Yeah, the only thing that is obvious is the Earth is obviously and observably flat. You look out, you never see any curve, you see flat. Doesn't matter how high you go. If you send a balloon all the way up to 120,000 feet, there is no curvature. Of course, NASA has to fake that by putting fisheye lens on things. But we can't measure curvature. We cannot see curvature. It's just not there. So there's nothing obvious about a ball Earth at all. And that statement is absurd, patently.
Yeah, it really is.
Makes all of the observations fall into place.
And I think that we have just shown that, except for the cycles of night and day. And of course, we're going to get to that. But we'll continue on.
As Earth rotates, it's daytime when facing the sun and nighttime when facing away from the sun. The inherent motion of all these celestial objects utilizes elliptical paths and can therefore be predicted. The seasons occur because of the amount of sunlight hitting one hemisphere versus the other at any given time in Earth's orbit. 1 year is also no longer an arbitrary amount of time. It's equal to one revolution of the Earth around the sun, and the differing lengths of night and day are also explained by the tilt in the rotational axis. The Coriolis effect.
Okay. So, all right. One of you guys want to explain why, how night and day actually works on a flat Earth for Dave, before I shatter his rotational model around the sun?
I can take a quick crack at it. And he mentioned a bunch of things. He mentioned night and day. He mentioned the seasons. These things are not exclusive to the ball Earth. And anyone who claims that they are exclusive to ball Earth or even exclusive to flat Earth is wrong. But a year is, it's not arbitrary. It is consistent of the sun making a 6-month pass from Capricorn to Cancer, and then another 6 months pass to Cancer to Capricorn. And that right there would have been a year. It's not just an apparent traveling of the sun between these points, as they claim, because in the ball Earth theory, the sun isn't actually moving from Capricorn to Cancer and back. It just appears that way because, as he said, of the tilt of the Earth. But in the flat Earth reality, the sun is actually following a trajectory which is tighter around the central north in the northern summer, and wider around. It has a wider radius in the southern summer. Now, this is all according to the azimuthal equidistant layout, but it makes perfect sense in flat Earth. And granted, it does make some degree of sense in the ball Earth hypothesis. But, again, this is one of those things where ball Earthers like to present this as if day and night and the seasons are exclusive to the ball. And just that just is not the case in reality.
No, I think on the screen here is one of the best depictions of it. You can see that it travels between the tropics there, and then it hits Capricorn and hits Cancer. But again, in the globe Earth belief, the fact that we have to believe that the sun is 3 million miles closer during our northern winter is enough for me to say, cry foul.
Yeah, 3 million miles, by the way, Dave, is nearly 400 Earth diameters. Okay? So that seems to fly directly in the face of the heliocentric model. But
correct. And if the globe Earth model was correct, well, then the North Pole and South Pole should be nearly identical, yet they're not at all. It definitely favors the flat Earth model, where the sun gets close to the inside, causing 24-hour daylight in the north, and then it goes to the outside, and it never really gets very far towards the outside, so we have less animals there. We've got no flora, no fauna. We've got completely different living conditions in both areas. Obviously, the north becomes a pool or a pond, and the south is a forever frozen tundra.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm going to play a couple videos that are only a minute and a half apiece, and then I'm going to shatter Dave's model of his solar system. Anyway, let's listen to this really quick.
Zones. Time zones are said to be caused by the rotation of the ball Earth, so that when one side of the ball faces the sun, that side is experiencing day, whilst the opposite side experiences night. On the flat Earth model, however, the sun is much closer to the Earth than claimed by modern science, acting more like a local spotlight overhead as it revolves around the central pole in 24-hour cycles, illuminating the areas beneath it, then disappearing beyond the scope of the observer's perspective as it moves farther away, creating the illusion of sunrise and sunset. An interesting side note, further demonstrating that this phenomenon occurs on a flat plane as opposed to a ball, is that on a ball, 12 o'clock noon in the summer would wind up shifting, becoming 12 o'clock midnight in the winter, and vice versa. Additionally, at northern latitudes, the Arctic...
Now, I want to point out that the mainstream explanation for this is that, the Earth actually rotates 361 degrees per day. That is the rebuttal to this particular answer. So yeah, okay, whatever, if that's what you want to say.
Arctic phenomenon known as the midnight sun frequently illuminates parts of the Earth on opposite sides of the North Pole simultaneously for periods lasting up to several days. But in Antarctica, the sun has never been shown to illuminate lands on opposite sides of the alleged geographical South Pole simultaneously, whilst unedited videos featuring the Antarctic midnight sun remain elusive even now. So investigate the subject for yourself.
Okay, so there's that one. And now I'm going to go to the second video that he has come up with for this. And let's look at the polar climates. And you're saying, what does animals and foliage have to do with it, Dave? Well, everything, really, when you think about it. What it proves, and what we're going to show here, is that on a spinning ball Earth, the climates should be roughly the same on each side of the globe. The fact is, they're not even remotely close at all. So let's listen to this a little bit.
Earth Proof 6. Polar climates. If Earth were a globe, then it should follow that both the Arctic and Antarctic regions would share similar conditions and characteristics, such as comparative temperatures, seasons, length of daylight, etc. But in reality, the two regions are almost as different as night and day. To begin, let's address the prime influence on climate, the sun. While on a ball Earth, you'd expect the sun to behave very similar at both poles. In our investigation, we find this is clearly not the case. For instance, the longest days in the north are much longer than those in the south. Dawn and dusk also occur differently in these two regions, with twilight coming and lasting much longer in the north, sometimes for over an hour, compared to similar southern latitudes where twilight always comes and goes quickly, sometimes in a matter of minutes. This is exactly what is to be expected from a flat plane, with the sun circling above and around the central pole in 24-hour cycles, traveling steadily between the tropics every 6 months. Sticking to the sun, another contrasting point between the northern and southern regions is the midnight sun, a distinctly Arctic phenomenon occurring every year during the summer solstice, where, for several days, any observer significantly far north can watch the sun travel in circles overhead, not setting for upwards of 72 hours. Meanwhile, in Antarctica, corresponding with the Arctic midnight sun, the Royal Belgian Geographical Society notes that from May 17th to July 21st, the sun doesn't even rise above the Antarctic horizon. This is, of course, because during those days, the sun is at his innermost cycle, revolving revolving tightly above and around the northern center. Though scientists will claim that the midnight sun is also an Antarctic experience, there are no uncut videos demonstrating this, nor are any independent explorers allowed into Antarctica to either verify or refute this claim. But that issue's a whole other can of worms. Further demonstrating that the central northern regions receive a more benevolent climate than their southern counterparts would be the example of Iceland. At 65 degrees north latitude, Iceland thrives with 870 native plant species and abundant animal life. Compare this to Georgia Island, which, despite being a whole 11 degrees closer to the equator than Iceland, at 54 degrees south latitude, is nearly devoid of any ecoculture, having only a measly 18 native plant species and virtually no animal life. In fact, Captain James Cook lamented that he was unable to find there a single shrub large enough to make a toothpick. But to crown it all off, despite the Arctic regions enjoying moderately warm summers and manageable winters, where the average annual temperature is minus 15 degrees Celsius, Antarctica is by far the coldest place on Earth, with an average annual temperature of minus 50 degrees Celsius, where it never even warms enough to melt the perpetual ice and snow, and it also holds the all-time lowest temperature ever to be recorded on Earth of minus 93.2 degrees Celsius.
So Dave's in there saying, ecology is irrelevant. This is the dumbest thing I've ever seen. Wow, Dave, your cognitive dissonance is showing to a huge degree, Dave. You know what? This is all part of what we call a preponderance of evidence. While you may not think that any one of these points proves conclusively or disproves conclusively the ball earth or the flat earth, you must take these facts into consideration. And yes, the climate does matter. It absolutely does, because it is incommensurate, it is inconsistent with a heliocentric spinning ball Earth that supposedly is having roughly equal amount, well, exactly equal, in fact, amounts of sunshine on each of these hemispheres. Whereas, isn't it interesting, Dave, that in the flat Earth model, these climates are 100% exactly to be expected? Go ahead, John. Or whoever.
I think I was going to mention that the seasons are really important, because there has to be some explanation for the changing of the seasons. And, of course, in the ball earth theory, they've got a fairly, logical explanation for seasons. And in flat earth, the same thing applies. So the fact that ball earthers continue to this day to mention seasons as, yet again, exclusive to or in support of the ball earth theory exclusively, it's another one of these situations where they've got blinders on, or as I like to say, they've got globe-colored glasses on. Because if you prove to somebody and show just mountains, literally a world full of evidence that the Earth is flat and stationary, many people simply are unable to see it, or they refuse to see it because they do have these blinders on. And, I must say that this was by design. We were all indoctrinated by the same educational curriculum, the same system, which basically gets us when we're very young. They have us believing during our formative years all of this nonsense, and it is pretty difficult to get out of that mindset, or at least to remove yourself from that mindset, if for no other reason than, for argument's sake, to possibly get yourself closer to the truth. So one of two things can happen. You can either confirm what you already thought to be true, which you can feel more comfortable in your existing belief, or you can astonishingly disprove what you thought to be true. And if you're being honest with yourself and you do the research, every single person that was a globe earther that is now a flat earther had to go through this. it took me about a week to go from the point where I started, logically scrutinizing and humoring the flat Earth theory, and then a week later, I was 100% sure that I was wrong the whole time. But it's not something that happens overnight. It really isn't. It's something that is going to be an emotional struggle. And nobody, well, maybe there's some exceptions, but the majority of people that are flat earthers, this didn't happen overnight, because there is such a deep level of indoctrination in the globe earth theory at such a young age that anybody who says that they instantly became a flat earther after looking at it is either really smart, or maybe they're lying to themselves. But that is what it is, man. There's no way around it.
Yep, exactly. Okay, so moving on, this is a graphic that Professor Dave used, claiming Kepler's laws, validate all this. They're easily predictable. The gravity, they can calculate all this stuff out, under gravity. I got news for you, Professor Dave. First of all, did you know that science is unable to even solve a 3-body problem, let alone 4, 5, 6, 10? It can't be done. All right. So wherever you're getting this math from that's saying that you can prove all this mathematically, I'd love to see it. But as far as Kepler's laws, I'll tell you one thing that Kepler's laws did not take into account. What you're showing here is based on everything being in this particular static model. Now, before I move on to this next video, I want to show you something that if you don't know, then maybe you should. But as you know, or you should know, the Earth is spinning allegedly at 1,040 miles per hour, okay, at the equator. All right. In addition to that, the Earth is going around the sun at 67,000 miles per hour. Okay. And in addition to that, the sun is going around the Milky Way at 500,000 miles an hour. Okay. And in addition to that, the Milky Way is going around the Great Attractor at 1.3 million miles per hour, or 2.1 million kilometers per hour. Okay, great. Now, it's interesting that Kepler's laws do not take that into account because, and I'll tell you why, because otherwise Kepler would have to deal with something like this. Now, here's what you're claiming is reality right here, that this is the way that everything is going. There's the sun, all the planets are going around it. Sure, Kepler's laws of motion theoretically can predict all that and all that. Now, this is actually a typo. This is incorrect. So as I said, our solar system is moving through space at 500,000 miles an hour. Okay. Now, here is a much more accurate depiction in the heliocentric model of what our solar system is actually doing. Now, where is Kepler's laws in this particular model, Dave? The mathematics for this are not being taken into account. And this is only showing the forward velocity of the sun at 500,000 miles per hour, which show up nowhere in Kepler's equations. And of course, the 67,000 mile per hour, like we said, velocity of the Earth around the sun was never picked up in the Michelson-Morley experiments or anything like that. In fact, all experiments have shown the Earth to be completely at rest, let alone traveling 1.3 million miles per hour around the Great Attractor. And of course, science also tells us that, the universe is ever expanding. And so, who knows what exponential velocities are actually being compounded on top of that. But these do not show up, and they absolutely would be required in learn about inertial reference frames. I knew you were going to say that. Yeah, we're going to show you all about inertial reference frames, Dave, and how Einstein was full of crap. Okay. But yeah, inertial reference frames aren't going to cut it. These are absolute motions that they're telling us that they're going. And yet these absolute motions have never been registered on any type of interferometer. The only measurement of any type of motion at all that has ever been picked up on an interferometer is a 15 degree per hour rotation, which, as you may know, I am quite famous for pointing that out in the Behind the Curve movie. However, the Globers, in their ignorance, take this to mean that I have done something that nobody in the history of mankind has ever done, and that is prove the rotation of the Earth. Well, unfortunately, this was already gone over 125 plus years ago in what was called the Michelson-Gale experiment, which you probably don't even know about. But Michelson-Gale came up with exactly the same results that our fiber optic gyros today are proving. And yet, the interesting thing is that there's no such thing as absolute motion. I love this. This is so great. Anyway, the Michelson-Morley experiment, which is also based on laser interferometry, was unable to prove this velocity, this forward velocity of the Earth around the sun. So what the ballers or the globe earthers are wanting to do is they're wanting to say that, oh yeah, laser interferometry absolutely works because of the Sagnac effect in proving the rotation of the Earth, going back to Michelson-Gale, but then they turned right around and deny the linear velocity that was unable to be registered by the Michelson-Morley experiment. Sorry, you can't have it both ways, Dave. And yes, when I say absolute motion, don't tell me there's no such thing as absolute motion. But you know what? That is where the whole idea of the Flat Earth Society's, 9.8 meters per second of gravity going up, it comes from. And where that comes from is none other than Albert Einstein. And I'm going to show that to you here in a moment. So again, Dave, you can't explain this. If science is telling us that we're going at all these velocities, then you're telling science that it's not true. But we would happen to agree with that. We're not going at all these different velocities because the stars have never changed in all of recorded history, all of millennia. Nothing has ever changed. We don't see any stellar parallax, even though you would claim that there is, based on redshift, etc. Of course, that's another subject that we don't want to tangent off onto yet. But no, we agree with you. The only thing that is in motion is the sky. And that particular motion was proven that the stars were actually rotating above the Earth by Airy's failures experiment, which indicated that it was indeed the stars moving over the Earth and not the Earth under the stars. Okay, any comments, guys?
Yeah, I would just quickly mention that this animation that we're looking at is beautiful, and it really does illustrate just how absurd the ball Earth theory is. Now, one thing that's agreed by all sides, the globers, flat earthers, and everybody, is that the Earth itself is absolutely a fixed frame of reference. Okay. Now, the reason that this is claimed to be so by the globers is they say that's because there is no acceleration. Only acceleration can be detected, felt, measured, whatever. So, that's their position. However, when you've got curved linear motion, orbiting in curved paths, rotating around the face of the Earth, orbiting the sun, all of this is curved linear motion, which is
acceleration.
It has built-in angular acceleration, and that is always going to manifest as centrifugal force. Now, you can get into debates about just how much force would be involved there, but at the end of the day, it would be detectable, it would be measurable.
Right.
And as this illustrates here, you don't have, everything's not in alignment. You've got the ecliptic plane that is misaligned to the sun's path around the galaxy, which is misaligned to the galaxy's path through space. And so you would have just all sorts of different combinations of motion. So it's not like there is no, or there shouldn't be any acceleration in the ball Earth reality or hypothesis. There should be loads of acceleration, and not just angular acceleration either. It's claimed by the ball Earth theory that the Earth changes its velocity depending on the time of the year. So the whole argument about the Earth being a fixed frame of reference because there's no acceleration is just absolute hogwash.
Yeah.
Well put.
Yeah, very well put. And of course, the ballers will come back and say, well, you of course you can't feel these velocities, these changing angular velocities, because your vestibular senses are not sensitive enough. Same way that the pilots will say, well, your vestibular senses cannot possibly detect the however many 100 feet per minute that you would actually have to be diving to follow the curvature of the Earth, depending on your speed. But the problem with that is our vestibular senses may not be able to register that, which I would argue that we could. But even if it is true that we couldn't, our instrumentation absolutely could. We have accelerometers that are in your cell phone, Dave, that are so incredibly sensitive that it boggles the mind. And yet science to this day has not been able to prove any of these velocities not going around the sun or anything like that. And, we also work with a laser interferometry. And as I was telling this story last week, laser interferometry is so unbelievably sensitive in detecting motion and things changing that, I was in a lab last week where one of the engineers that's in FE Core was demonstrating to me his Michelson-based laser interferometer. And it was interesting because this interferometer was mounted on a 4-inch granite slab, which was mounted to a steel table, which was bolted to a concrete floor. And it was after work hours. Everybody had gone home, and we had the interferometer on, and we were just watching it, and it was measuring a measured shrinkage in the granite. And we're going, what in the world is going on here? Well, what was happened is that somebody had turned the heat down a few degrees because it was Friday, and it was literally measuring the contraction of the granite, right? And showing up in the laser interferometer. And this laser interferometer only had a resolution of 10 to the negative sixth. Now, some of the newer laser interferometers, like ring laser and fiber optic gyros, have a sensitivity of 10 to the negative ninth to 10 to the negative 12th. And ironically, still, the only motion that can be registered is the 15 degrees per hour, which is not Earth rotation, Dave. In fact, it's quite easy to prove that it's the energy of the heavens and of the ether, the luminiferous ether, which Einstein had to eliminate in his theory of relativity. Of course, but then again, it was also Einstein that came up with the model that the Flat Earth Society, remember, government disinformation people, that the Flat Earth Society uses for gravity. And I'm going to prove that, Dave. So anyway, all right, let's go back to his video and continue on.
Bob or Jaron, real quick, and this would be for my benefit and probably for the audience as well. Now, I know we've mentioned it before, but could you guys, or maybe one of you guys, explain what do you mean by a 2-body or 3-body problem, and how science cannot solve it? Or is that maybe too complicated for the time?
No, it's just, gravitationally speaking, if you can picture that everything changes because everything is gravitationally pulled in their model to each other in itself. And right. So when you take 3 bodies, like even the Earth, the Sun, and the Moon, they can't calculate on paper, at least with any kind of formula, the exact location of where those things will be, say, in the future. Simply because any movement of one requires too much mathematics on the others to ever be able to be worked out mathematically. So they can have, they have computer models that they say come close. But as far as like a formula or some way to mathematically come to an answer, it's not possible for science to do that.
Exactly, because all the variables are constantly changing. And it's one thing to do it between 2 bodies. But as soon as you add a third, a fourth, a fifth, that changes the mathematics for all the bodies, and even the best supercomputers in the world cannot calculate it. It can't be done. So that's the problem.
But of course, Rez Reddick can solve a 10,000. He can solve a 10,000 body problem in his head, right?
He can figure out all the moons of Saturn on his own. He could do it right now.
Yeah,
you want him to?
It's absurd. All right, let's continue on.
Celestial objects utilizes elliptical paths and can therefore be predicted. The seasons occur because of the amount of sunlight hitting one hemisphere versus the other at any given time in Earth's orbit. 1 year is also no longer an arbitrary amount of time. It's equal to 1 revolution of the Earth around the sun, and the differing lengths of night and day are also explained by the tilt in the rotational axis. The Coriolis effect is just the result of simple physics related to rotating bodies like the Earth. The hemispheres have different skies because they point out at different regions of space. Everything we...
And again, total ignorance of the flat Earth model when he asserts these things. And as we have just, disproven everything that you have just said, Dave, and the flat Earth model actually has a far better explanation. Talk about ad hoc explanations, Dave. The globe Earth is the king of it. And in fact, there is no observational evidence, period, that proves a spherical Earth. Or that it's rotating or moving in direction. And in fact, all of the evidence, empirical and otherwise, proves that it is a flat and motionless Earth. And yet you will sit there and profess, Professor, that this is so obvious. And in fact, it's not. And you can't prove any of it. Let's continue on.
They just believe in mathematics. So, the mathematics says that it's possible, and therefore they claim it to be fact. That just because the math says that there could be a sun 867,000 miles wide of a certain, mass that would pull the Earth towards it, and that the Earth would be this big, and that it would move at this speed. Those things are all just, assumptions, presuppositions, and mathematics that prove nothing. But again, these people believe that math is reality, and all they need to do is ask themselves, if it came out tomorrow that the Earth was actually traveling around the Great Attractor at 57 billion miles per hour, that there's nothing they could say. They couldn't come back and say, well, I don't really think that's true, because basically what we've been told is that the Earth and its atmosphere being attached are able to travel any speed through the universe. It doesn't matter. We would never feel a thing, which just makes no sense. They love to talk about putting us in an airplane. Oh, if you're in an airplane, you can't feel how fast you're going. Yet it's clearly harder to walk to the front of a plane than it is to walk to the back. And there's a reason for that, and that's because of your momentum, and you can feel that, and you can tell, and you can call it inertia, whatever you want. Clearly, it should be harder to walk east than it is to walk west. Yeah. And it's not. Yeah. And that's simply because we're completely and totally stationary.
Yeah, absolutely. Like if you're doing an Olympic, say, long jump event, I would always opt to jump from east to west because, where you're going to land should be racing towards you. And of course, the globe earthers are going to say, well, you have your momentum that's lent to you by the Earth, spinning east, and you're going to retain that momentum forever. And the same thing applies to airline flights. But if you do an experiment, or maybe it's just a test, I don't want to get into hot water here, but if you do a test on a train or, like you said, on a plane, and just simply jog from the front of a moving train to the rear, and maybe time yourself or just observe, and then do the same thing running or jogging to the front of the moving train. I've done this myself. I promise you that you'll find that it is much easier to run from the front of the train to the rear. And that's because all of the destinations or the rear of the train is traveling towards you. So a moving train is only a fixed frame of reference as long as you are stationary and fastened to the train. The instant that you start accelerating in a direction contrary or even in accordance with the velocity of the train, it is no longer a fixed frame of reference. And the same thing should apply to the spinning ball Earth, but magically, it doesn't.
Even though it's not a closed system, even though it's completely open to the vacuum of space, which is a whole other subject. But there's no way that you could just have a Earth flying through space. Like Bob said, I think the 2.2 million miles per hour is how fast the Milky Way is. Oh, is it kilometers?
It's 1.3 million miles per hour.
Okay, so 1.3 million miles per hour around the Great Attractor, and to just think that could be increased to 197 trillion miles per hour, and there's nothing you could say about it. That's what proves that it's all mathematics. There is no evidence. There is no supporting proof. It's simply, hey, we wrote this down on paper, and it all works out, and we can plug it into our model on the computer and it works out. Well, of course it does. You've gave the Earth a certain size and mass, and you've given it a certain gravitational pull, and then you've made the sun and a ridiculous size and a ridiculous distance. The sun that we see in our sky is simply not 867,000 miles wide. That's your mathematics, not scientific evidence, not scientific proof.
Exactly. And of course, like any true glober, he is completely derailed and gone off the subject, and his last comment was, the entire periodic table is quantum calculations, and it works. We use it to do chemistry. You have no clue what you're talking about. Well, first of all, Dave, we're not talking about chemistry. We're not talking about quantum calculations, and the periodic table is not mathematics, all right? It's just not. You're sitting here just spouting nonsense. You're not even on subject to what we're talking about, but you have to go off and sound like you're some sort of smarty pants by using big words like quantum calculations that work when it's not even, it's non sequitur to even what we're talking about here. So why don't you stick on to the subject, Dave, and we'll do a whole lot better.
Is this guy a robot? Like, seriously, is he like an AI robot? I want to know.
Yeah, we should probably just stop addressing him because he's never going to. This is just like all Globers, right? I mean, they would never concede a point ever because to them, science is everything about it is a fact. Like he said, you guys don't understand physics. This is his only way out, and for him to concede 1 point would call into question everything that he believes in. So it's the same thing as us trying to talk to a Christian and get them to concede that maybe possibly Jesus wasn't God. It's just not going to happen. He's going to sit there and fight his preconceived beliefs the whole time. I mean, it's just obvious at this point.
Yeah, and his rebuttal is, you just don't understand. You just don't. Dave, do you think we're not educated? Think again, buddy.
Right. And like how if anybody that, and you're right, Jaron, the globe earthers that are very staunch, they will absolutely never concede a point, even if it's valid. So again, I have done the test where I will jog to the front of a moving train, to the rear, and then vice versa. And there is definitely a marked difference in the amount of energy that you need to spend in order to get a high velocity going relative to the train. So if anybody says, oh, well, you don't understand. Well, I'm sorry, but I do understand. I've done the test. I'm not sure if you have, but that is not how you argue science. And in fact, there's no debate to be had here. You either do the test or you don't. And if you disagree with me, that's fine. Please explain why you disagree. But just to say that we don't understand is a cop-out, but it is extremely typical for the ballers.
Yeah. Exactly. And now he's gone to just straight up lying. Stop addressing me. You haven't addressed a single thing I've said. You just periodically said, oh, Dave is there and he's an idiot. I have not called you an idiot once, Dave. I'm sorry. Even though I do call people idiots and you're acting like one, Dave, but I have not called you an idiot. So stop lying. Okay, this is what Globers do. They revert to lies and they don't listen to the material being presented. However, we are going to stop addressing you, Dave, because you are clearly blind and have no idea what you're talking about. And, if you're a professor, I feel sorry for your school. That's all I can say. All right, let's continue on.
Well, he's doing what he was told to do, right? He's doing what he's told to do, which is to read the curriculum, the lesson plan, the educational programming. It's what can be expected.
Yeah, pretty much. All right, let's go.
Perfect sense with one simple unifying assumption. That's what science is all about.
Science is not about unifying assumptions, Dave. Let's continue on.
In the flat Earth model, all of these observations require their own separate explanations. What is night and day? If you try to place a luminous object like the sun above a plane like the flat Earth, how does light reach half the plane and not the other half?
Now, this is just pure ignorance of the flat Earth model. How does it not reach? Well, first of all, because it's much closer and much more local. That's the typical baller claim that, if the Earth was really flat, the sun would light up the whole Earth at the whole time. Yeah. Is that kind of like if you take a flashlight and you shine it down at the floor, it lights up your whole damn house? I don't think so, Dave. That's not the way that it works. Second of all, have you ever heard of the inverse square law of light? Obviously not. But we'll cover that in a few minutes because you're obviously clueless to it. Otherwise, you wouldn't be making ridiculous assertions like this. Let's continue on.
You come up with a mechanism.
Go ahead, John.
I was just going to say, clearly refraction comes into play here as well. So the sunlight is not going to shine forever in all directions. When it hits the atmosphere, it's going to be bent or perturbed in varying directions. But that's a very, very simple one to answer. It's just so difficult to deal with people like this because even when you make a valid point, you can even show evidence in a lab for how this works. It goes in one ear and out the other, and they claim that you don't understand science.
Yeah, it's us that doesn't understand science. That's laughable. All right, let's continue.
whereby light dissipates appropriately. How does this then fit with other observations? Dissipates appropriately.
I'm sorry, I got to play that again. That's so funny.
You come up with a mechanism whereby light dissipates appropriately.
To come up with a mechanism whereby light dissipates appropriately.
The atmosphere, the air,
the atmosphere,
around us.
the air, the inverse square law, light dissipates, by that alone. It's like this guy is so
we don't need to
lost
come
in
up with that.
space.
That's already been come up with.
Yeah.
Right, because I think he would have a valid point if we lived in a vacuum. I really do, because I just don't think perspective is enough to cause the sun to apparently drop without refraction. But as long as you've got atmosphere, and Dr. Zach did a video about a year, maybe a year and a half ago that did an excellent job of making this point. And basically what he did was he took obviously a flat table with a light above it, and the light was shining 90 degrees straight down over the table, and it had a convex lens through which the light would pass through. And basically he had a bunch of nails on the table standing up on end at varying distances, and essentially what he did was the Eratosthenes experiment or test on the flat table. And based on the data that he got from this test, he proved mathematically, using Eratosthenes' exact same method, that the table was a sphere. So there you go.
Yep, that's true. Broderick, yeah, I agree. He says, Globebusters, be nice to Professor Dave explains. We were all there once. And yes, we were. But, the only reason that I'm agitated with him is because he's sitting there fighting back with nonsense and making accusations, saying that we're saying things that we're not and that we just don't understand. Like he's the only one here that has an education. Sorry, Dave, you're not. So quit, get off your high horse and listen for once. You're not the professor here, okay? And so that's all I'm saying. Yeah, we would love for you to understand this and actually, check your ego at the door and, consider what we're saying. This movement is not growing into the tens and hundreds of millions of people because they're all stupid, okay? Like I said, there are physicists, there are scientists, there are engineers that are coming forward in droves that are simply too afraid to speak out because of their jobs, like I said. So, it's not just a bunch of dumb people on YouTube, Dave. It's much, much bigger than that. And it's going to continue to get bigger because people are actually hearing the wisdom and the logic of the words that we're speaking here. All right. So let's move forward. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say that the hard part about flat Earth is not providing evidence. It's not proving that the Earth is flat and stationary or proving that the Earth isn't a spinning ball. The biggest challenge is to simply get people to consider this with an open mind. I mean, that really is. That's the biggest hurdle. And this Dr. Dave, whatever, Professor Dave is demonstrating that very clearly.
Yep. All right. Let's move forward.
How does this then fit with other observations? What are the seasons?
Explained.
If you try to explain them by pulling the sun closer and farther from the Earth, how can it be winter in the north and summer in the south?
As we just already explained that, Dave, in that last video, and not to mention, like Jaron pointed out, we've got nearly 400 Earth diameters that we are closer to the sun, at least in the northern hemisphere, in the wintertime. That is completely disconnected from the logic of the heliocentric model, but again, makes perfect sense in the flat Earth model. Go ahead, Jaron.
No, I was just going to say the same thing, that he's trying to pull the sun up away and closer when we're talking about the sun simply going between the tropics. John described it being at the equator 6 months later, or not 6 months later, 3 months later being at the Tropic of Cancer, and then 6 months after that being at the Tropic of Capricorn. So yeah, it's nothing like that, and it's a close sun, and so it allows it to keep its light on only about half the plane at a time.
Yep. Exactly. All right, let's move forward.
What is the Coriolis effect? If
Explained.
Earth is a plane, what magically alters the rotation of a storm in one half of the plane compared to the other?
Explained.
Shouldn't we also all be seeing the same night sky, since our lines of sight all face the same direction?
Explained.
Flat Earth subscribers do actually attempt to answer all of these questions, but beyond the fact that the explanations are never mathematically or logically sound. The sheer fact that each phenomenon requires its own independent explanation makes it unscientific. If we invent a luminous sun-like object and start tracing elaborate paths through the sky, this is just the epicycles from the geocentric model all over again. It's assumption upon assumption.
Assumption. You know, I'm going to say something. Yes, the flat Earth model is geocentric, but you know, geocentrism and admitted by almost every scientist that has ever walked the face of the Earth, is indistinguishable as far as from an Earth observation, which one is actually happening, the heliocentric or geocentric model. Okay, so you know he's like, oh, it's so obvious that the heliocentric model is correct, and that the flat Earth or geocentric models require all these ad hoc explanations. And so Dave, you know, obviously knows better than all the scientists and physicists that have been, you know, in this debate and discussion for hundreds of years. I mean, this is just sheer arrogance, ego, and ignorance.
Right. We got quotes from Einstein and Hawking, all these guys that say exactly that there is no way that you would know the difference, that you couldn't know, especially if you're a believer in relativity. Then certainly you know that there's no way to know if there's no, you said there's no direct motion, or there's no fixed motion. But clearly, if that's the case, then how could you ever say that the Earth goes around the sun? It makes no sense. That if there's no, you can't come up with that, then it's the same. You know, somebody standing on the sun would see the Earth going around it, and somebody standing on the Earth would see the sun going around it.
Yep, precisely.
But many quotes that that tell you that you're wrong about that.
Yeah, which of course the only thing he's done is gone to the Flat Earth Society. And like I said, Dave, you know, I know you're still out there. I know you're still listening, and you're gonna love your criticism of the Flat Earth Society's 9.8 meters per second upward gravity. You are going to love where that came from, buddy. All right, let's continue on.
Adjustment upon adjustment, all of which are totally ad hoc.
Hardly.
Based in nothing but an attempt to fit observation. This is very poor science. When we say...
What?
Wait a minute. So it's nothing more than an attempt to fit, our explanations are nothing more than an attempt to fit observation?
That is what science is.
Oh my God, we're guilty. Holy cow. Yes, Dave, we're guilty of that. Right. You're right, buddy.
Do not try and match your theories with observations. What you need to do is just come up with things like dark energy, dark matter, gravitational waves. That's all you need to do.
Yeah. You need to make sure that no matter what evidence presents itself, the Earth absolutely must not be central or special or unique. The Earth must be a speck of dust in the infinite cosmos, spinning around and orbiting aimlessly with no purpose. Life on Earth is just a freak accident, a chemical, freak thing that happened millions or billions of years ago. Right. And if there is any evidence to the contrary, you must ignore it and hide it. That's real science.
Yes. Observations tell us that we're in the center of the universe, but instead of that, we should pretend that we're on a balloon, and that somebody's blowing up the balloon, and so we're all moving away from each other. That's crazy. I should get that Edwin Hubble quote out just so he sees what happens when we're talking about the observations that tell you that you're right in the center of the universe, and yet here comes Edwin Hubble. Here, I have it right here. Such a condition would imply that we occupy a unique position in the universe, analogous in a sense to the ancient conception of a central Earth. This hypothesis cannot be disproved, but it is unwelcome and would only be accepted as a last resort. Therefore, we disregard the possibility. The unwelcome position of a favored location must be avoided at all costs. Such a favored position is intolerable. Therefore, in order to restore homogeneity and to escape the horror of a unique position, we must compensate by spatial curvature because there seems to be no other escape. That's the sound of science at play. No, that's the sound of a man with a worldview who is refusing to go by observations and instead would rather make something up like the expanding universe that exploded from nothing at the Big Bang and continues to fly out at crazy speeds, past the speed of light. Just insane.
Yeah, and let's not forget that even in modern day experiments that have been recently done in the last decade, like the cosmic microwave background experiment and measurements, right? What did it find? It found that the Earth was at the center of all of that cosmic microwave background. Oh no, right?
Imagine that. Yeah, and if he hasn't seen the movie The Principle, you should check it out because it's all your favorite physicists like Lawrence Krauss and Michio Kaku and Julian Barber and all these guys that are spelling it out for you right there. And then, of course, the claim is, oh, but they were tricked into this documentary. They didn't know that it was being made about geocentrism. Doesn't matter. All that matters is they were interviewed, they were asked questions, they answered them, and it just so happens that all of their answers coincide with the idea of geocentricity. So it makes a great movie.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And then you got people like I forgot the girl's name that was the narrator for the movie, but she claimed after it came out she had no idea what the movie was about, and she was the narrator.
Yeah, Catherine Janeway. I spaced out her name.
What is her name? Yeah, I forgot her name.
Somebody will put it in the chat. But anyway, also Max Tegmark from MIT,
right?
Physicist, was in that. And,
who fought it as hard as he can. He kept saying, well, this, it can't be that this cosmic microwave background coincides with the ecliptic of the Earth, and sure enough, it does, which proves that we are central. But again, they're going to fight it through, no matter what. They have to fight it because that's the point of science. Science is built on these assumptions that the Earth cannot possibly be central, that it's a sphere, it's a planet just like the other wandering stars, that it's flying through space at crazy speeds around the sun, and that all the other stars are just other suns. So they'll never go back and look at the foundations of what they've created. And I've talked about it before about a tightrope walker. All science is like a tightrope walker, where you just want to walk from point A to point B, and you never want to look down and look at your foundations, because the second a tightrope walker looks down, that's when they fall. They just have to keep their head on. Science works the same way. They just have to keep plugging forward, calling people stupid who don't agree with them, saying that they're morons, making fun of flat Earth, and just continue straight ahead. Yeah, we don't understand. We're not smart.
Well, and I think there's a distinction to make here. And I know what you meant, Jaron, but I think it's important that we make the distinction, because our words are always taken out of context. But there's a big difference between science and theoretical astrophysics. Theoretical astrophysics is not demonstrable, not repeatable, not falsifiable. So it is exactly pseudoscience. Whereas science is, by very definition, all of those things: demonstrable, falsifiable. And so, but we've been sort of trapped into this mindset that theoretical physics and astrophysics are science, when in fact they are exactly the opposite of that. So, just wanted to put that caveat in there.
No, I agree.
Yep. Okay. Yep. And it was Kate Mulgrew. Thanks, chat, for that.
Thank you very much for that, Kate Mulgrew. Yes,
that did the narration. All right, so let's keep going on. We're only 6 minutes into this, and we've just absolutely destroyed every part of it so far. But let's continue on.
The Earth is round and put the sun at the center of all this motion. Not only are all of these phenomena easy to explain, even to a layperson, but predictions can be made. In 2017, a total solar eclipse occurred over the United States. Using a modern understanding of astronomy, we can do math to predict any such event, like eclipses, the return of Halley's Comet, or anything else. This is done very simply with the sun at the center and using Kepler's laws regarding elliptical orbits, which involves basic algebra accessible to anyone.
Yeah, basic algebra. If you're assuming that the solar system is standing still and not moving, and the sun is absolutely not moving, and only the planets are moving around it. As soon as you put in all the other motions into the equation, it becomes not only extremely complex, but it becomes untenable. It becomes impossible to solve that equation. It's as simple as that. Ay, caramba. All right, let's continue on. Actually, well, there's some other stuff about this, about the prediction. It's okay. Let's continue forward. We're running short on time here.
Only in this model is the math so easy. So when we operate under this framework and say that a solar eclipse is going to happen at this time, on this day, in this place, and then it does match our prediction with extreme precision, there can be no clearer vindication for this model of the solar system. Game, set, match.
Yeah, right. Okay.
Wow.
God, where do I even start with this? First of all, I guess, well, you guys address this. I need to pull up a video really quick.
Well, I would just say that much of the astronomical predictions are based on past observations. So people have been observing and documenting the behavior of the heavens for a couple thousand years. And when you're talking about eclipses, eclipses occur in cycles. And this is true regardless of whether you assume the Earth is flat or a sphere or whatever. Now, these cycles, I think for solar, it's like 19-year cycles. There are variables that, in terms of like the position and the exact time, but these cycles, when they were first observed in a geocentric flat Earth hypothesis, there were some issues with like the predictions. However, I think that this again falls back onto refraction of light, because it was assumed historically that the light from the celestial sources was coming towards the Earth in perfectly straight lines. Now we know that there is bendy light, and it's not just the atmosphere. The Earth has a magnetic field, and magnetic fields can indeed perturb and bend the path of light. And so, yet again, it's claimed that predictability of the heavens is exclusive to the ball, and I would say that is again false. Predictability of the heavens is due to the very astute and keen observations of past astronomers and the cyclical nature of the heavens. And I would just say finally that the fact that the heavens are perfectly cyclical really flies in the face of the ball Earth theory, because the sun isn't alleged to be allegedly stationary. The Earth isn't allegedly stationary. There's tons of motion and angular changes, and so the fact that we see this perfect predictability and perfect cyclical nature is just antithetical to the ball Earth theory.
Yeah, absolutely. And the document I was looking for, which I closed earlier, is right here. The eclipses are basically taken from what's called the Saros cycle, okay, which was, which is nothing more than predicting the obvious, the cyclical nature of eclipses, right? These have been, eclipses have been predicted by incredible accuracy going back over 2,000 years. And this device right here is proof of it, okay? And it is not based on a ball Earth heliocentric model at all. And they have, they recovered this device, they studied it. Now they have a working 21st century model of it, and it is unbelievable what it predicts. Not only does it predict eclipses, like even on the moon, it will even tell you what color the eclipse is going to turn, right? Which is astounding. All of this stuff was known over 2,000 years ago, long before or around the same time that Eratosthenes allegedly did his experiment, which of course has also been debunked by none other than Neil deGrasse Tyson. But we have this, we have astrolabes, right? The Saros cycle, all of this stuff has been known for a long time. And NASA, by the way, gets this, their eclipse prediction model from that guy, right? Soros, right? Fred
Aspernak.
Fred Aspernak, that's right. So it's not even like NASA is giving this to us. And by the way, when you look at these eclipses on a flat Earth model, on the AE, Dave, what they do is they show them going around perfectly in the circle, which makes a whole lot more sense because they match the sun and the moon pass far better than this nonsense, messed up thing, much like the AE map, that we were talking about here. Okay. In other words, everything works a whole lot better on this map than it does on the ball Earth. Air currents, wind currents, water currents, particulate currents, everything, weather patterns. We have something that are called the counter-rotational energies that are coming off of this this particular model, the Earth. And God, I'm drawing a brain cramp, so I'm not going to go down that road. Anyway, everything fits perfectly when you lay it out in a circular type of map, an AE map. This is poetry in motion. It's absolutely beautiful as compared to this, which is completely a jumbled mess and makes no sense whatsoever. It also makes a lot more sense when you look at things in the AE model, especially when you're looking at air currents. And, people talk about the Santiago to Sydney flights. Well, if you go into them with understanding that there are winds aloft and these patterns are traveling, these wind currents are traveling in these patterns, especially towards the southern edge, and their velocities are extremely high, that go up to 199 kilometers per hour or 136 kilometers per hour, and you add these velocities onto the aircraft flight speed, which gives you a higher ground speed, then all of a sudden these distances are not so impossible to believe, and they make a lot more sense on the flat Earth. Just like every other flight plan makes a lot more sense on the flat Earth. Okay, it just makes more sense all the way around. So,
and that only shows, too, the 33,000 feet of altitude. So we don't know what planes at 35, 37, 41, 44, we don't know what kind of speeds of the winds that they're getting. Or at less than that, 20, 25 or 26,000. So definitely a lot to be discovered there.
Yeah, 218. Go ahead, John.
Well, I was just going to back it up a little bit because we were on the topic of eclipses, and I know we agreed we weren't going to address Dave, but, well, what the heck. And this is for everybody, but eclipses is something that is just, well, there are some points about eclipses that are just completely terrible for the globe Earth side of this argument. I'll try to cover this real quickly, but you've got, during a solar eclipse, the shadow of the moon is cast upon the Earth. Okay, now this is one of the only times in all of nature where the heavens actually meet with the Earth and we can measure what's going on up there. And of course, that is in the form of the shadow of the moon. Now, usually the shadow of the moon is about 75 miles in diameter or so. Sometimes, a few times historically, it's been measured as little as 2 or 3 miles in diameter. Now, keep in mind, the ball Earth theory dictates that the moon has a diameter of, 1,000 miles? Something like that. 2,000, whatever. And its distance is supposedly 2,000 miles.
2150.
There you go. Okay, so the moon supposedly has a 2,000, give or take, mile diameter, and it's supposedly about 250,000 miles away. Now, the problem here is, first of all, that the shadow of the moon being, we'll say, 75 miles in diameter, can you demonstrate anywhere in reality where a shadow coming from an object with a single light source diminishes in angular size proportionally with distance to the point where you have like a pinpointer shadow of the moon hitting the Earth? Shadows simply do not behave like that. And in order to make this work in the ball Earth theory, they've got the penumbra and umbra theory, where the light from the sun is converging upon itself at some point in space, and then diverging from that point in order to create this really peculiar light source that casts a shadow of the moon that tapers off into a point. Okay, so if you hand them that for argument's sake, which is a big gimme for the Globers, because again, that's not how shadows and light operate, but it completely disagrees with Eratosthenes' method of triangulating on the sun to get an estimate of the Earth's circumference. Because again, in order for his method to work, you have to have the light from the sun attacking the Earth at parallel angles. So this is yet another one of those instances where observable reality does not match with the ball Earth theory, and so more conjecture is piled on top of these assumptions to make it work. But again, they forgot to consider the fact that the umbra penumbra thing disagrees with Eratosthenes' method to estimate the circumference of the Earth, and that is a flagship cornerstone piece of so-called evidence for the globe, completely destroyed by their very own numbers and their very own math. So eclipses, there's a lot of other things about eclipses that are wrong, but that is a big one, and hopefully, Dave and the other ball earthers can consider that, because, again, it kills the globe. It really does.
Or the whole nonsense about Eratosthenes measuring that the Earth was a sphere and knew its exact size and stuff in 275 BC, but it then took 1,800 years until somebody got in a boat and said, "Let's go west." It's just ridiculous.
Right. Yeah. Well, and of course, Columbus disagreed with Eratosthenes' value of the circumference, which, it's why he ended up not where he thought he was going to be. He thought he was going to wind up in Japan, and he ended up, of course, in, the Bahamas, I think? Never even set foot on America.
Yeah.
Right, and it makes no sense to me, too, that they call Indians, and then if you ask somebody where that word come from, they say, "Oh, Columbus thought that he had hit India." Well, somebody go get a map and look at what the East looks like and explain to me how he supposedly hit India. There's a lot of other places you can't even get to India. How can you get over there? They had to know China existed, and all the other places that are Thailand and everything else that you would hit before you would ever come close to hitting India. How the hell could he have thought that? It's ridiculous.
Yeah, exactly. So, I've mentioned this a few times, and I think obviously Dave needs to hear, because I'm sure he's thinking Eratosthenes. So Dave needs to hear this from his God. Okay. So let's go ahead and play this, because this is a good refresher for other people. And I also want to I want people to pay special attention to the wells that Neil is showing. And ironically, even in his 3-well model, it's it's working perfectly in the flat Earth model. But so here you go, Dave. This is for you. This is your God, Neil, speaking. Here we go.
Famous experiment conducted by Eratosthenes. Eratosthenes in the old world. And one of them, they knew that at 12 noon on a particular day of the year, that the sun was directly overhead and you could see the bottom of a well.
How can we use this observation to see if Earth's surface is curved? We needed another well. Turns out we can't see the bottom of both wells at the same time. What might explain this? Well, there are two possible explanations. First, we could have a flat Earth with the sun that's small and close by so that the light hits the second well at an angle. Or second, we could have a curved Earth with a sun that's big and far away so that all the light comes in parallel, but only one well at a time is lit all the way to the bottom.
Okay, so first of all, now you've just heard Neil deGrasse Tyson make the admission, or you will, that both the models will work. However, what Neil does not take into consideration, and apparently neither did Eratosthenes, is the refraction of the Earth, of the atmosphere, right? So if sunlight is coming in, it doesn't enter in strictly parallel. It would hit the atmosphere, and because refraction is caused by a change in density of the medium, then it would necessarily be refracted one direction or the other, right? Whoops, that was never taken into consideration, and of course would invalidate Eratosthenes right then and there. Okay, so let's continue on.
Yep.
Flat Earth model can explain the angles of all.
And yet they are exactly, note again, they are exactly the same on the flat, the sun angles, as they are shown on the ball Earth, which is pretty funny.
all three shadows. But the spherical model explains it all three angles, with ease.
Could it be, Eratosthenes asked, that at the same instant there was no shadow at Syene and a very substantial shadow at Alexandria? The only answer was that the surface of the Earth is curved.
And also notice, guys, that, in one story it's wells, in other stories it's sticks or obelisks, or in other stories there's wells and sticks. So, when you're making up history at ad hoc, Dave, then your lies usually conflict with each other and they don't add up. Okay, so I'm going to let it's music so you can read the text. But the bottom line, Dave, is that even Eratosthenes has been debunked by your own God, Neil deGrasse Tyson. So that experiment doesn't even fly. And that is the basis, Dave, for people saying, well, science knew 2,000 years ago that the Earth was a ball. I beg to differ, Dave, because the Anti-Crepuscular device is not based on a heliocentric ball model at all, and made predictions that are virtually every bit as accurate as what NASA is doing today, Dave. All right? So anyway, let's continue on. Unless you guys have any other comments?
No, I was just going to say one more time, reiterate that Neil deGrasse claimed that there was no explanation for this in flat Earth. But one more time, back when this experiment or test or whatever was first conducted, there was no scientific understanding or factoring for atmospheric refraction. Okay, and so Eratosthenes would have assumed that the light from the sun was always traveling in a perfectly straight line from the sun through the atmosphere to your eye. Yet we know that cannot possibly be the case. And so any sort of discrepancy in the third well that may, even though that was never actually tested, if there was such a discrepancy, it would be easily accounted for by refraction. So that was it.
All right, beautiful. Whoops, I'm previewing something here. Let me go back to this. All right, so let's go back to his video. Here we go.
The flat Earth model can never make such predictions, not just because the notion of an eclipse has no logical basis, but also as there is no unifying mathematical system. It's a bunch of separate phenomena with separate explanations, if such explanations even exist. It doesn't end there. The flat Earth model has a huge laundry list of other things to explain besides what we have mentioned so far. Everything we see in space is a sphere. Why is Earth the only thing that isn't? Things fall to the Earth because of gravity, which attracts things to Earth's center of mass. If Earth is not a sphere, why do things fall to the Earth? What is gravity? The implications run so much deeper than just what rotates around what. Ad hoc solutions are offered.
Okay, first of all, I'm not going to play this, but what is gravity? Well, that's a good question, Dave, considering your scientists don't even know what gravity actually is. Otherwise, they wouldn't be fumbling around with stupid experiments like LIGO, which is essentially nothing more than a Michelson-Morley type of experiment interferometer, in which they make a crazy assumption that that when a gravitational wave passes through the interferometer, it will cause the tunnels to physically shorten and change size, right? Now, we have no example of that anywhere in science where that is true because A, you can't even demonstrate a gravitational wave other than if you want to take Neil deGrasse Tyson going on stage and dropping a microphone and calling that gravity. If you want to call that it, well, I guarantee you that even if you did that by an interferometer, it's not going to cause the interferometer tunnels to shorten. It's patently absurd. So talk about ad hoc explanations and solutions. LIGO, and of course LIGO's been debunked so many times by even people in the mainstream science community. They're not buying it. And in fact, LIGO was busted the first time, faking it. They had to come out and admit it and say, well, it was just a test of our operators to see if they were actually following the method. And then, of course, they came back on the 100th anniversary of Einstein's prediction of gravity waves and bada bing, hey, LIGO got a beep, a chirp, that was it. And this all of a sudden proves a gravitational wave that came from a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, 1.4 billion light years to be exact. And yet, if that gravitational wave was the only thing that was big enough to set off the LIGO detectors, you have to wonder, well, how come if the moon is supposedly generating enough of a gravitational field to lift up the tens of trillions of pounds of Earth's ocean water, then why isn't that setting off the LIGO detectors? It isn't because it's operating on a false premise and it's a big lie. And you can sit here and say we don't understand this, Dave, but you would be quite wrong because we have lectured on this many times about exactly how it does work and how it is quite impossible the way that it works. And it's not just a bunch of stupid flat earthers that are making these assertions. Many people in mainstream science are also crying foul on this LIGO experiment as well. Okay. In other words, common sense completely annihilates the idea that gravitational waves are causing things to physically change. This is an Einsteinian model of gravity. And that's another thing that's a huge conflict. Which gravity are we talking about here, Dave? Are we talking about the Newtonian model, in which masses attract each other? And then you have to get into what exactly is mass. Well, if you want a tutorial on that, Dave, look up my video, Globebusters video called Sunday Mass, in which we show you all the mainstream scientists, the famous physicists that are on TV even, Dave, and they're all contradicting each other because they don't have a damn clue what mass is, especially when you leave the Earth plane, okay? Now, mass on Earth is nothing more than weight, okay? It's as simple as that. But when you get outside of Earth, it becomes increasingly more speculative. And then you come up with ridiculous things like, then you have Einstein's model of gravity, which of course is theoretically the bending of space and time. And this is gravity. Again, something that is not demonstrable, is only theoretical, is only mathematical. You have no proof of it whatsoever, and it is just stupid. Okay, it makes no sense, and it's a big lie. And I'm sorry, but you're never going to be able to prove it because there is no proof for it, no matter what your mathematical equations say, Dave. Okay, so now we're going to get to the good point where he's pointing out the fallacy of the government-run Flat Earth Society site and how it is such a big farce. And you know what, Dave? We agree with you. It is. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, hey Bob, I just wanted to make a quick point, and I know I maybe not so quick, but I'll try. And I think you covered gravity really well, but I just want to say that what goes up must come down is absolutely a thing here in reality. Nobody's arguing that. But as you said, the cause of that on the spinning ball Earth theory is the mass of the Earth warping physical space and non-physical time. So I'm really not sure how you can bend time, but maybe that's just because I'm a stupid flat earther. But here's the thing. First of all, you can't demonstrate in reality that mass attracts mass. There's no sort of experiment or data or test that you can do in oh goodness, what was his name? The stupid balls in the shed experiment or whatever.
Cavendish.
Yeah, the Cavendish experiment certainly notwithstanding. But there's no evidence to suggest that mass attracts mass. And if you assume that the Earth is a spinning ball, what you would expect is that objects that are on the surface of the spinning ball would tend to be propelled away from the center due to centrifugal force. And so gravity is a necessity in the ball Earth theory to counteract that force and assure that objects are stuck to the sides of the spinning sphere. So only in the ball Earth theory is something like gravity necessary. In the flat Earth reality, we do have an objective up and an objective down. There is not relative to where you are, and we're not all hypothetically on the top of the world. There is an objective up and down. So ultimately, and correct me if I'm wrong, Bob, but this is what I believe. This is a bit of conjecture, but it makes a lot of sense to me that in order for density and buoyancy to dictate what is going to go up and what is going to go down, you do have to have a tendency for higher density objects to fall and relatively lower density objects, liquids and gases, to rise. And it really does seem feasible that downward tendency of higher density objects is the static electric charge of the Earth. That is measurable. There's no theory behind that. I think it's 100 volts per meter in altitude of static electric charge. And so there is definitely a feasible explanation for what goes up must come down on flat Earth. Now, again, on ball Earth, you would absolutely not expect loose objects to fall. You would expect the opposite of that. And so gravity is an apologetic thing for the spinning ball Earth because high dense objects fall. Now, really quick, the other thing that he mentioned before he mentioned gravity was everything in the sky, all of the objects in the sky appear to be spheres. Therefore, the Earth must also be a sphere. And I would say that is just nonsense. The sky could hypothetically be full of spheres, and those objects are simply not the Earth. So even if you prove conclusively that the sky is full of spheres, that does not relate to proof that the Earth is also a sphere. The best analogy that I could give is that just because pool balls are spherical does not therefore make pool tables spherical. And people have said that that's a poor analogy, but I'm sorry, that's exactly the same thing. You do not measure pool balls to get the dimensions of pool tables, just as you do not measure the moon to get the dimensions of the Earth. So there you have it.
Exactly. Okay. Yeah. So, and like I said, we're not going to cover this, Dave. If you want to go and look up the real gravity, I give a lecture on it on the Globebusters channel, in which I present a model that's not my own, by the way. It's something that is presented by the Electric Universe and a legion of electrical engineers and physicists that are proposing that gravity is actually more of an electromagnetic / electrostatic phenomenon. I go into this in detail because it coincides with the natural electrostatic field of the Earth, which raises at 100 volts per meter, going all the way up to 50 kilometers or 5 million volts of static potential. I have backed it up with other experiments that were shown by the University of Bristol, which did a piece on spider ballooning and proving that spider ballooning does not take place by air currents blowing the silk around, but rather the spider is able to change the electrostatic bias of the silk strand that they are casting, and then are essentially acting as an anti-gravitational device. Now, there's a million other things that I have lectured on and that other scientists and engineers have talked about in this theory that are far more plausible than the ridiculous Newtonian or Einsteinian gravitational model, which are just nonsense. Okay, so now let's listen to what he says about this, and then we're going to show you where this model comes from, Dave. Here we go.
Deeper than just what rotates around what. Ad hoc solutions are offered, like the idea that the flat Earth is accelerating upwards with an acceleration of 9.8 meters per second squared, and that's why we all stick to the ground. But this doesn't help. It actually makes things worse. What is up? What is causing the acceleration? If it is constantly accelerating, we should be traveling the speed of light by now. What is meant to be a simple explanation actually complicates things so much further. Then there is the matter of the geometrical implications.
All right, let's stop right there and let's go to, hang on a second, let me find it. All right, here it is. Okay, now Dave, this video was done by Professor, he's a PhD in astrophysics, forgot his name off the top of my head. Where is it? Gabe Perez Giz. He's a PhD in astrophysics, and he is going to take us through Einsteinian relativity, and he's going to tell us where the Flat Earth model, or the Flat Earth Society, got that ridiculous model of gravity. All right, so let's listen to Gabe and see what he has to say, because this is truly entertaining. Here we go.
Isaac Newton said that an apple falls because a gravitational force accelerates it toward the ground. But what if it's really the ground accelerating up to meet the apple?
Yeah, what if, Dave?
Suppose I drop an apple. According to Isaac Newton, the ground can be considered at rest, Earth applies a gravitational force to the apple, and that force causes the apple to accelerate downward. But according to Einstein, there's no such thing as a gravitational force. Instead, it's more appropriate to think of the apple as stationary, and the ground, along with everything on the ground, as accelerating upward into the apple. Now, what I just said sounds preposterous and maybe even moronic, but it's not sophistry.
Actually, it is sophistry, and it does sound preposterous and moronic. In case you didn't catch that, Dave, let's hear it again.
But according to Einstein, there's no such thing as a gravitational force. Instead, it's more appropriate to think of the apple as stationary, and the ground, along with everything on the ground, as accelerating upward into the apple.
All right, and of course that goes right along with the logic of thinking if you walk down the street and you trip on the sidewalk and you fall and smash your face on the sidewalk, that it's just as probable, according to Einstein, that the sidewalk jumped up and hit you in the face. It's retarded, Dave, and this is where the Flat Earth Society got this model from, none other than Albert Einstein. Now I'm going to play a few minutes of this, and then I'm going to kind of skip to the end because it's 10 minutes, and I don't want to really waste that amount of time. But this particular video will be in the show notes, but it's very clear that it is your God, Albert Einstein, that came up with this retarded model that the disinformation, government-controlled Flat Earth Society uses as their model of gravity, which we could not agree with you more, Dave. It is preposterous.
Now, what I just said sounds preposterous and maybe even moronic, but it's not sophistry. There's something substantive here, and today I'm going to clarify what exactly this point of view means, why Einstein came to adopt it, and how it planted the seeds for what would eventually become general relativity. You ready? Okay, bear with me for a minute, because we need to begin with some Physics 101 and Newton's laws of motion. To analyze motion, you need what's called a frame of reference. That's just some XYZ axes to label points in space and a clock to track time. The reason you need a frame of reference is that you can only measure motion relative to other things. If that concept is not familiar to you, you need to pause me right now and go watch this super awesome 1960s black and white video from MIT all about frames of reference. It's amazing, and I promise you won't be disappointed. Welcome back. Now, Newton's laws can't tell you whether a frame of reference is really at rest or really moving at constant velocity, because that distinction is meaningless and simply a matter of point of view. However, interestingly, Newton's laws can tell you whether your frame of reference is really accelerating or not. Here's how that works. Take an object with no forces on it and let go of it. If it stays right where it is, then your frame of reference is not accelerating, and we call it an inertial frame. Now, in Newtonian physics, inertial frames are special because Newton's second law, F equals ma, is only valid in inertial frames. In other words, the net force on an object will equal that object's mass times its acceleration only if you're measuring that acceleration using an inertial frame. For example, suppose that you're in a train car that starts accelerating uniformly forward along a flat track. Relative to the car's interior, you will accelerate backward, even though you can't identify any horizontal forces on you. So inside the train car, F decidedly does not equal ma, and the train car's frame of reference is not inertial. In contrast, a frame attached to the tracks pretty much is inertial, at least if you disregard Earth's rotation, because relative to that frame, you don't accelerate at all. Instead, the train car accelerates forward underneath you. Now, more generally, any frame that accelerates relative to an inertial frame will not be inertial. You got that? Inertial frame and non-accelerating frame are synonyms in Newtonian physics. In fact, you can think of inertial frames as the standard against which you measure true acceleration. And from the perspective of inertial frames, motion obeys a simple rule, F equals ma. All right, let's look at things from the train car's frame of reference, though, a little more carefully. Inside that accelerating train car, not only does everything accelerate backward for no apparent reason, everything accelerates backward together. You, a book, and an elephant will all lurch toward the back of the car with the same acceleration. Remember, from the preferred point of view of the inertial frame that's attached to the tracks, you, the book, and the elephant are all stationary.
You know, Darren, I got a comment. You know, with regard to what we were talking about last night. This pretty much goes directly against what you were showing me, doesn't it?
Yeah, no, that is garbage. I'm going to do that in a video because I even tried to rationalize it more last night and just could not gather where they were getting that from.
No, it's crazy. Sorry, guys. That was kind of an inside thing. Jaron will be releasing a video on it soon. Anyway, he goes on to describe these. Go ahead, John.
Oh, no, finish up, and then I've got a note. So go ahead, finish up, and I will go then.
Okay, cool. So let's kind of jump forward, and we will kind of come to the conclusion of what he comes up with. But basically, this is a mock argument that he's presenting between Newton and Einstein about what gravity is and how it could possibly work. But again, it's all horse manure because gravity is neither caused by mass attracting mass, nor is it caused by space and time bending into pockets and then having things fall into it. Both notions are ridiculous, and neither can be demonstrated reliably. And believe me, the Cavendish experiment is far from any type of reliable experiment, as we have shown in many videos, and you know, professors that have utter frustration with this, right? But of course, Professor Dave will come back and say, "Oh, it's done every day in colleges everywhere." Yeah, okay, whatever. And it certainly is not done the way that Cavendish did it. And Cavendish didn't do his experiment to even prove gravity. Do you guys know what the idea behind Cavendish was, right? To measure the mass of the Earth. Right? It's funny how they always go to that. So let's kind of jump forward and let him go to the conclusion of this in his little mark argument. Go ahead, John.
But yeah, before we get off the topic, I just wanted to throw in there that the whole notion of, the Earth racing towards the apple is the same thing as dropping the apple towards the Earth. That to me is just absurd, and it can be proven false. Let's use an analogy, and let me know if I'm missing something, but I would much rather run at 10 miles an hour towards the front of a semi-truck and smack into it than to stand still and have a semi-truck rolling towards me at 10 miles an hour and smack into me. So there is a difference here, and the same thing certainly should apply to the Earth and to physics, but if you claim that everything's relative and okay, you've got the inertial reference frame or whatever, to me, it's just mathemagic to apologize for their absurd position.
Yeah, I totally agree. Okay, so let's finish this out. And by the way, we still have to address the eclipse thing. We didn't go into that very far. And I do have another video here and stuff. But suffice it to say that the heliocentric model of the eclipse is nonsense, especially when you start considering the sizes of the shadow that are going over these heavenly bodies. But I digress. Let's finish this out. Here we go.
Spokes. So from the perspective inside the box, they won't actually remain stationary. They accelerate toward each other slightly. Illusion.
Okay.
First, two objects in a falling box are falling toward Earth on not quite parallel radial spokes. So from the perspective inside the box, they won't actually remain stationary. They accelerate toward each other slightly, even though there are no forces on them, in seeming violation of F equals ma.
In theory.
Second, by your criterion, Einstein, orbiting frames of reference, like on the space station, should also be considered inertial. But those frames accelerate relative to frames that are just falling straight down. And if you recall at the beginning of the episode, inertial frames aren't supposed to accelerate relative to each other. Huh, that's a good point. So it looks like game over for Einstein, right? Well, not quite. It turns out that there's a loophole that makes Einstein's viewpoint self-consistent. The rule that inertial frames can't accelerate relative to each other turns out only to be true if the world has what's called a flat geometry. If instead, the world is a non-Euclidean and curved spacetime, then straight line at constant speed doesn't mean what you think it means. And it turns out that inertial frames in a curved spacetime can do almost anything they want. It took Einstein about 7 years to realize that.
They can do anything they want, according to Einstein. And it took him 7 years to realize that anything can do anything it wants. And so, Dave, do you realize now where that stupid model came from? Yes, your God, Albert Einstein. So it is not a flat Earth premise. It is a mainstream Einsteinian physics premise. And yes, we agree, it's utterly retarded, but then so is Einstein's theory of relativity and special relativity, because it has been debunked a million times and it is just so stupid, it's not even hardly worth discussing, even though we have, and we do in depth every week, because that's what we do on Globebusters, is we talk about these things that are patently absurd and defy all common sense and logic. So again, you're going back to, you guys just don't understand the math or this, that, and the other thing. And what was it that Tesla said? And I'm going to paraphrase this, but, science has gone off and wandered off through equation after equation until basically now science has no resemblance to reality whatsoever. And I know that's not the exact quote, but that's the gist of it.
Close enough.
Close enough for government work. All right, so let's go back and continue this. We're almost through it.
How do we slice up the globe to make it flat?
Actually, it's the other way around. It's how did they take the flat Earth and wrap it around a globe? But, we're not going to go there right now.
What places are far away that we thought were close? How is it possible to fly or sail around the world, which has indeed been done by so many people? Where is...
Oh, my. Okay. All right. So he claims that, yes, people have flown around the Earth, and they absolutely have, but only, billions and billions and billions of people have flown around the Earth from east to west, okay? Absolutely no doubt about that. But the north to south routes are highly dubious, to say the least. They don't really fly around the Earth or anything like that. They not north to south. In fact, every route that has ever been diagrammed and laid out, they simply show that people traverse down to Antarctica and then they turn around and they come right back up. They never actually go across this. And even the people that are claiming that they have done this have done so. There's so few of them, and all of them, by the way, are Masons, right? Or royal family or something like that. But right. The average Joe can't go down there. So no, I'm going to call you on that one, Dave. People have not circumnavigated the Earth north to south, regardless of what your media has told you. And if it was that common, then flights would be going over the South Pole as a matter of routine. Why don't they? What is their excuse? Oh my, it's just too cold down there. Well, it may be too cold on the ground, and you're right, it probably is too cold because the sun doesn't reach there because we're not on a ball. Now, on a flat Earth model, that makes perfect sense that it would be too cold. But, theoretically, when you're getting into the upper elevations, up to 30 to 50,000 feet where the aircraft fly, you're well above the weather storms. And yes, we already know that it's very, very cold up there, but it's certainly not too cold to fly. So it begs the question, why are there not routes going over Antarctica that are absolutely crossing it? The reason, Dave, is because the Earth is not a ball. They don't go there because they can't. It's the same reason why they are unable to show a 24-hour sun. Yes, there's 24-hour sunlight or daylight, but not 24-hour sun itself. And every piece of footage of that has come out has been so easily debunked. And you say, flat earthers, they just deny every photographic evidence. No, Dave, we look at it, we analyze it forensically, we look at it very carefully and logically. We also look at the damn timestamps that are on the videos that show 8 to 10 hour gaps of this Antarctic footage. And there simply isn't any footage. If there was, we would be absolutely inundated with it, Dave. But we're not, okay? It's a problem. And it would be so simple to prove us wrong, but they don't. And they won't even address it. And of course, what's the rebuttal to that? Well, NASA has better things to do than to rebut a bunch of flat earthers on space missions and Antarctica. Really? Do they? We're the ones that are paying the taxes, Dave. Therefore, it should be us that they're answerable to. Instead, all we get is CGI fakery, and we haven't even addressed that yet, of which the evidence is so voluminous, and not to mention what I have right here on the screen of even something that you have shown. The picture that you've shown of your 1968 Apollo 8 mission has one of these around it, a white Photoshop box. They're fake, Dave. They've been forensically proven to be fake. They have been analyzed by PhDs in this type of field that can actually debunk it. What's the website?
Aulis.
Yeah, Aulis.
AULIS.
Yeah, AULIS.com. Look at that. You have a bunch of PhDs that are taking this apart. It's fake, Dave. It's not flat earthers that are simply claiming it's all fake. There is a huge community that are not flat earthers, that are indeed moon landing deniers, that have debunked everything about the Apollo missions. And if you believe it, Dave, then you are a gullible fool. Okay, that's all I can say, especially after being presented with the clear evidence that the flat earthers have come up with, and even not flat earthers. Okay, so all right, so let's go back to this. Where's the edge of the Earth? And that's a whole nother thing. Look on the Globebusters channel for Antarctica. Sorry, we're closed on the Globebusters channel. You will find out why people are not allowed down there. It's because of the Antarctic Treaty. Go ahead, John. John, were you going to say something?
No, I'm sorry. I unmuted myself on accident. You're good.
Okay, cool. All right, let's continue on.
Is the edge of the Earth? Why hasn't anyone seen it? What about all the pictures we have of the Earth from space? Again, ad hoc solutions are required for all of these questions. It is proposed that a huge ice wall surrounds the Earth, which we call Antarctica. No one can go there because NASA is guarding it.
No, Dave, NASA is not guarding it. NASA is an American government agency. It is guarded by the combined military force of all the parties to the Antarctic Treaty. And how do they guard it? Where's the budget for it? Have you ever heard of a black budget project, Dave? Probably not, because you believe that the government is legitimate in every way, shape, and form. Have you ever heard of radar, Dave, where you don't have to have people walking guards? They can see ships, they can see planes coming in. It's really quite easy, Dave. But here's your ignorance shining through, buddy. Let's continue on.
How? Where is the personnel? Where is the budget for such an operation? NASA also fabricates all of the photos we see.
Oh boy, do they.
Why? What is the motivation, and how? We have had photos of the Earth from space since the 60s.
And that is a fake image, Dave, and we can prove it and have. And as a matter of fact, I just showed it on the last panel.
Which predates computer editing software by several decades. The logical hole gets deeper and deeper. Because it is impossible to form a consistent framework for these observations, the model must turn to conspiracy. Now, to be clear, I am a firm believer that outside-the-box thinking should be encouraged.
Now that is
as
the biggest...
long as you believe in physics and
stay inside the box.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, go ahead and apply that outside the box thinking, Dave, to your inside the box model. It is ridiculous. I mean, you are spouting utter nonsense.
And we should always be ready to challenge institutions and governments. But the validity of a conspiracy theory depends largely on how many people have to be in on it. The notion that all the governments and all the scientists and all the airline pilots and flight attendants and communication technology operators and thousands of others are all in on it, it starts to get pretty absurd.
Yeah, you're right, Dave. It would be absurd because they're not all in on it. It's compartmentalized. It's need to know. Are the governments all in on it? Well, absolutely they are, but only at the very highest level. Are all the scientists in on it? Well, Dave, if you're really a professor, that would kind of make you a scientist, wouldn't it? Are you in on it, Dave? No, of course you're not, because you're just following. You're only in on the propaganda part of it because you don't know how to think outside the box. You don't know how to question what you have been taught. And no, airline pilots, they're not all in on it. And in fact, a lot of airline pilots are fully aware that the earth is flat, but dare they say anything, they will be fired. It is just as taboo to be an airline pilot in today's world to mention that the earth is flat, even though you know it, as it was 20 years ago to mention that you had ever seen a UFO. That has now changed. Now they're encouraged to talk about UFOs, and it's all over the mainstream. Why? Because that's going to be the next step in the deception, Dave. And yes, this is all conspiratorial, but it's not us that's making up the conspiracy. The proprietors, the progenitors of these conspiracies are actually well known, and they're being exposed, and they're in absolute damage control mode. Flight attendants? Really, Dave? Flight attendants? Give me a break.
And, you know, when I was really young, I remember when my dad first told me, he busted out the globe and started explaining to me that the world that we live on is a ball. And I was pretty incredulous, but I was, my first thought was, okay, so what, we live on the top of this ball? And he's like, no, we live on the sides and it's spinning. And, there's no way when you're 5 or 4 years old or whatever that you're going to win an argument about the world with an adult or a teacher or whatever. And so every last one of us, even the pilots, and Bob, you're a pilot too, so don't speak of yourself in the third person. Give yourself a little more credit. But, the thing is we were all indoctrinated into this belief when we were very young. And no, our teachers weren't in on it. Our parents weren't. They're not in on it. If you rewind time back when they were little gullible children, they were also indoctrinated into this same belief system. And so, for people to claim that flat earthers believe that it's some grand conspiracy where, all these people are in on the deception is just absurd. That's not what any flat earther purports or believes. And, again, it really has to do with the fact that we were all really quite brainwashed into believing this absurd theory when we were so young. And, during our formative years, that's when we form our paradigm very concretely. It's when we form our ID. And so it is pretty difficult many years later to revisit this topic and come to terms with the truth that is completely opposite of what we were led to believe. But, please look into this a little bit more, sir, before you start making these claims about who all's in on it, because I don't even think that the majority of people who work at NASA are in on it. The guys that are designing satellites and designing the rovers and stuff, I'm very confident that they believe what they're inventing is going up into space. But that's it. It's plausible deniability, and they're disseminating the deception, sure, but not knowingly. They're not deceivers. They have been deceived just as we all were.
All right, we're not trying to say that he's part of the conspiracy, Professor Dave, if he's a professor or whatever he does, but we're simply saying that there's some lies that get propagated through those channels, but doesn't mean that the people that are saying them know that they're lying, and that's part of being a liar is you have to know what you're saying is false.
Exactly. And a good example of that, like I said, is Eratosthenes, right? It's been handed down and used by a million globe earth trolls that, 2,000 years ago, he knew it. Well, we just heard Neil deGrasse Tyson say, and not only that, common sense tells you that Eratosthenes was wrong. And Carl Sagan's assertion that it can only happen on a ball earth was wrong. And yet it's been offered for God knows how long as absolute proof of the ball earth, even before NASA ever went out into space, to verify the shape of the earth. And of course, like I said, Dave, we have got so much evidence to show that we're not just calling these pictures and videos fake. We can prove it forensically. And I mean, we can prove it. Every bit of it. NASA is lying. They are fabricating stuff. We even have NASA employees, Rob Simon, that tell you that the pictures of the Earth are fabricated. He tells you straight up. I've got that quote that hopefully we'll get to be able to play this for you. But again, you have researched nothing but the Flat Earth Society. Dave, you are ignorant, buddy. And it's time that you take your ego, set it aside, and do a little bit of real research. In fact, all of these things that you should know are going to be in the show notes. And so what you need to do is watch some of these things, and so you can get a better idea of where we're coming from. We're not stupid people, Dave, and neither are they millions, tens or hundreds of millions of people that are disbelieving science and governments right now, Dave. Okay?
And I would say that Dave isn't stupid either. We were all right where he was at one point, and when I was first introduced to Flat Earth, I thought it was the most ridiculous thing I'd ever heard, and I didn't even look at it or consider it for like 6 months. But that's the thing. You have to consider it. You know, that's the key to it.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's continue.
Are all in on it? It starts to get pretty absurd. The manufacturing of a holographic sphere playing a movie of the heavens, which is operated by unknown entities oppressing mankind into deception and slavery, is really what we are left with for the flat.
No, or Dave, we could simply look at the Bible, which I know you don't believe in, and I'm not a religious person either. However, you know, there are a lot of people that do believe in the Bible that are Christians, and not just Christians, but most religions. Every cosmology in the world, Dave, has operated under the knowing, the gnosis, that the Earth is flat and that there is a covering over the top of us that has been called the firmament. And this is where these lights are, Dave. And you know, the belief that these lights that we're seeing in this are coming from tens of, you know, hundreds and thousands of light years or even millions of light years away is preposterous. Again, we refer you back to the inverse square law of light, Dave, and also the inverse law of angular size. All right. They don't jive. A simple example, Dave, and put this in your pipe and smoke it for a few minutes. All right. So, and I like to use this example because, you know, we talked about it at the conferences, but Dave, here's a little thought experiment for you. If the sun is 865,000 miles in diameter, okay, and it is, as we are told, it is 93 million miles away from Earth, or 8.3 light minutes, or just call it 8 light minutes away. Okay. Now, in a mere 8 light minutes, it has gone from an angular size of 865,000 miles in diameter, which is a size that none of us can even imagine, you know, let alone perceive, down to about 0.52 degrees in the sky. Okay. About the size of a nickel. All right. So if it's done that in 8 light minutes and following the inverse law of size and angular perspective, that means that if we doubled that distance to 186 million miles, then the angular size would then be reduced to about 0.26 degrees in the sky. Okay, now we have a little example of it here. Here's the sun at Mercury. Here it is at Venus. Here it is at Earth. Here it is at Mars, blah, blah, blah. By the time we get to Neptune, which is still in our solar system, and what, maybe a light hour away, a couple light hours maybe away, it's down to a pinpoint of light. And that's even assuming that its intensity can remain at that level at all, which I highly doubt. But then we're talking about, well, let's look at other things like Polaris, which is only supposedly like 400 times larger than the sun, but it is not a light hour away, Dave. It's not a light day away. It's not a light week away. It's 450 light years away, Dave. What does that do to the angular resolution argument? What does that do under the inverse square law of light? How bright would it have to be, Dave? That it would be pretty crazy, wouldn't it? Beyond that, let's look at something else. And this is brilliant. And this is something that Jaren did a video on. So let's go to this, and I'm just going to play a minute of this. Listen up, Dave. You might learn something, okay? Let's see.
So you see, we can say the moon is 100 lumens, and it doesn't really matter which number we place on there, as the result will be the same. So at 240,000 miles, we have 100 lumens. At 120,000 miles, we have 400 lumens. At 60,000, we have 1,600 lumens. At 30,000, we have 6,400 lumens, and so on and so forth, and so on and so forth, till we get down to 1,000 miles distance. When we're 1,000 miles away from the moon, the lumens should be 6,553,000. So if we divide that by the original 100, we see that from 1,000 miles away, the moon would be 65,530 times brighter than it is from Earth. Is that what we saw? Well, here's some photos from Apollo 17 from 800 miles from the moon. And you tell me, is that moon 65,530 times as bright as it is from Earth? Of course not. So, one thing or the other isn't true. Either we've never been to the moon, or the moon is far closer. What can't be true is the moon is the distance that they tell us, and that man has been there.
Exactly. Okay? Just something, that's just some food for you to think about there, Dave. Inverse square law of light and the inverse law of angular size. Okay? Both of them make our heliocentric model impossible. Go ahead, John.
Well, and I was going to say, there's a lot of other examples that use this same exact argument. So, like one example would be the LISS, the International Space Station, the big Limobile in the lower magnetosphere, I believe. They claim that, I forget what the altitude that they claim
it's a
that
thermosphere. Thermosphere is where it's at.
Thermosphere.
4,500 degrees Fahrenheit.
Right. But so, okay, this thing is, we'll say, roughly the size of a football field at that great of distance, where it's not generating its own light. It's reflected light from the sun, allegedly.
From the Earth.
You're right.
You're right. From the sun, you're right. I take that back. And the Earth. Yes, go ahead.
Okay. All right. So the thing is, though, if you actually believe that you can see a football field size object from 250 miles away, I've got a bridge I'd love to sell you.
Yeah,
because go ahead.
I was going to say it's ridiculous because when a 747 is at flight level of about 35,000 feet, you can barely see it. It's just a little teeny tiny dot in the sky. Even with our P1000s, we can zoom in on it, and that's about it. But that's 35,000 feet up in the sky, 6 miles. Okay, 6 to 7 miles up in the sky, and yet, if you apply the inverse law, not the inverse square, but the inverse law of angular resolution, there is no way that we can then see the ISS at 250 miles up. And mind you, Dave, that the ISS is allegedly traveling at 17,500 miles an hour, which is 5 miles per second, Dave. All right, that same distance that we can barely see the 747 flying along at. So to be able to see, and by the way, when you look at the ISS passovers, the spot the station bulletins, they will give you visibility factors that go up as high as 8 minutes. Typically, they're 5 to 6, but I have seen them as high as 8 minutes. Now, when you take 8 minutes at 5 miles a second, you're essentially saying that not only can you see the ISS at 250 miles in the sky, but you're also saying that you can see it as far away as all the way across the country. That is ludicrous. Can we see that light? Absolutely we can. Is it going 10 times the speed of a bullet? Hardly. Can we resolve it at that light? Can we justify the light level that we're seeing it at? The brightness doesn't even hardly change as it traverses the sky. Neither does the angular size, Dave. All right? Use your head, buddy. Talk about ad hoc explanations and you will swallow anything that you are told. I'm sorry, but you are lost in space. Go ahead, guys. All right. I guess we'll go on then.
I was muted. Dang, I think I forgot my train of thought. But, and I hate being mean to this guy, Dave, but he hasn't exactly been cordial to us. I really just beg people with, like him, with his position, that he give this topic a fair shake and have conversations with flat earthers and really do the research. when you're dealing with the ISS and other high altitude objects, it's very obvious to me now that I've looked into it that you absolutely should not be able to see it. Now, this one point alone proves that NASA is lying, at least about the ISS. So if they're lying about that, and the very pictures that globe earthers use to prove that the thing is up there debunks the notion that it's up there as high as they say, is you can't get much better than that. When you use their very own numbers and pictures of this ISS to debunk their position, it doesn't get much better than that. And we don't have to go as far as to say why they're faking it and how exactly they're doing it. All we have to do is bring it to your attention that they are faking it, provide evidence so that we're not just making unsubstantiated claims, and beyond that, maybe you can come up with proof as to what their motivating factors are. But the burden of proof isn't on us. Once you realize that the ISS should not be visible from its altitude that they claim, yet you can pull up pictures of it from the ground. That's it. As Dave said, game, set, match. So there you have it.
Yep, very, very good. Okay, let's continue on.
Flat Earth model. And perhaps that realization makes the whole thing make sense. It is the desire to live in a science fiction movie and feel like the hero leading the fight against evil forces that may be the best explanation for the motivations involved with those who insist on this model. So that's all there is to it. We do not say the Earth is round because we've been told it's round, or because we are repeating scientific dogma.
Really, Dave?
Wow. Kind of exactly what's going on.
That is exactly what is going on. You're right. Let's keep going.
Say it is round because it is the simplest explanation for what we see.
Really? So how is it the simplest explanation when what we see is obviously and observably and measurably flat, Dave? Talk about ad hoc BS explanations. I'm sorry, sir, but you are dead wrong.
The Earth is round because the round Earth model makes perfect sense of every observation we can make. No ad hoc reasoning, just a bunch of puzzle pieces that fit together to form a coherent view of the universe and everything in it.
Wow.
This is the same reason that the heliocentric model replaced the geocentric model when Copernicus and Kepler came around. It just works better. The orbits of the planets don't have to be explained by epicycles upon epicycles. If the sun is at the center of the solar system, the planets follow very simple ellipses, and Kepler's laws predict the positions of planets with much better accuracy and precision than...
Boy.
No, they don't, Dave. Because this is not how the solar system works. As we showed you, it's a vortex. It's careening through space at unbelievable speeds, and none of those additional angles of the planets, and not to mention their moons, right, which are also going around each of these planets as they go careening in a vortex pattern through space. What was your reply to that, Dave? What was that? Oh, relativity, an inertial frame of reference, Dave? Give me a freaking break. If that was true, then we would not have NASA telling us that we are actually traveling at these absurd velocities, because they simply wouldn't matter, would they, Dave? Okay, let's keep going. Jeez, this is crazy.
Any previous model. When the world is round, everything fits. In contrast, the flat Earth model has to come up with ad hoc modifications to explain each and every observation in a different way.
Oh, dark matter, dark energy.
Simply vanish with a round Earth. The Earth is round, and what
Quarks,
we see
muons.
makes perfect sense. The precise position
Neutron
of every
stars.
celestial object can be predicted with great accuracy far into the future.
Repulsive gravity.
We can say that an eclipse will happen at a particular time on a particular day in a particular place, and that's exactly what we see.
Yep, just like they were able to do 2,000 years ago, Dave. That's not good science. That's ridiculous science, and it's not science at all. It is parroting rhetoric and propaganda that simply is not true and is easily disproved.
This is the essence of good science, a model or theory that correlates mountains of data to form a simple and cohesive explanation for observations and makes falsifiable predictions regarding phenomena. If a model can't do that, it's not scientific. and the flat Earth model simply does not hold up to scrutiny, so it must be discarded, as it was for the majority of the human race a few thousand years ago. Now that we've caught back up to what we already knew, let's move forward and see what else we can say about the public's perception of space. Thanks for watching, guys. Subscribe to my channel for more tutorials. Support me on
blah, blah, blah. Yeah.
No, it's just I don't know. It's sad when you talk about he's saying we can just discard the flat Earth model, and yeah, it's at the beginning of us beginning to talk about it and just starting to iron out some of the issues, and that's how things have to go. That's the way it's going to have to go. So imagine if that's the way it worked when you just somebody has a new idea and you just discard it all the way because you're going to hold on to your dogma as long as you possibly can. The world would never discover anything new.
Yep, absolutely true. And Dave, pay attention to the graphic that's going on here, the video, and how on a flat Earth you can circumnavigate it too, because everything is based off of north. Now, what are the problems on circumnavigating on a ball Earth, Dave? Well, we'll tell you. First of all, nobody goes north-south. That's a huge problem. And second of all, when you get down as far south as Antarctica, you start running into magnetic declination variables that are as high as 173 degrees, Dave. All right? That doesn't happen on a flat Earth because we're not trying to compensate for an imaginary ball that is not there. But as you can see, it's quite easy to circumnavigate east to west or west to east on a flat Earth model, just like you claim to do. Now, you can also, make silly statements like, how come the sun on the equinoxes rises perfectly from the east and west? Well, I don't know if we even have enough time to go into that because we're at 4:15 Denver time. But, again, there'll be a video that addresses that also, Dave, because east and west are not what you think they are. And we're going to use your Google Earth to even prove that to you. And Jaron knows exactly which video I'm talking about. But Dave, there are so many things, and I'm telling you, it's not like we just, woke up and got out of bed this morning and said, gee, the Earth's flat. I myself am an engineer. We have engineers. I'm also a pilot. We have scientists that are part of this. I was educated in the same system that you were, Dave, and it took me a while to come to this. Okay. So we're not stupid people. We are very logical thinking people. And like I said, this would not be catching on to the tunes of tens to hundreds of millions of people if there wasn't something to it, Dave. And your hand wave dismissals of it are patently absurd. Okay, so that's all we're saying is you need to drop your ego and what you think you know, because what your university told you, whatever you're a professor of, which would kind of indicate you have a PhD in something.
Acid.
And I'm guessing that your PhD is in propaganda at this point.
Go to see Batman.
Are you, John?
Did you unmuted, Bob? John, Bob. Whatever.
Oh, John, you're unmuted.
Oh, sorry about that. I apologize.
Talking about Batman. All right. So anyway. Oh God, there's so many other things on here that we have talked about and haven't talked about, but we're running out of time. And we haven't even put a dent in the fake video, right? The fake videos. This video that we were showing at the very beginning, and we haven't really addressed the Eclipse. But you know what? We'll do that, and maybe another time. We'll see. Like we haven't already covered a million times already, but I think we have gotten the gist of it across. All right. This stuff is fake as F, Dave, and we can prove it. And not only that, like I said, it's a preponderance of evidence that tells you, like NASA saying, well, we can't leave Earth's atmosphere because of the Van Allen radiation belts. Orion is testing new special shields. So that we can get through it. Well, gee, how did you get through it in 1969 6 times, right? Or things like Don Pettit saying, I'd go to the moon in a nanosecond. The problem is we destroyed that technology and it's a painful process to get it back again. Really, Don? Dave, it's a painful process to go back to 1969 technology. These are ridiculous excuses. We haven't been back in half a century. They keep telling us every year we're going to Mars, we're going to the moon. We never go back. SpaceX is a joke. It's another CGI show. These astronauts and the Challenger, most of them are alive, even though we have our doubts about this particular one. It just goes on and on and on, Dave. Like I said, it's a preponderance of evidence, and it is so overwhelming that it absolutely boggles the mind, as to what we have come up with. So you need to spend some time looking at what we're talking about here, Dave. So you guys have anything else that you want to talk about on this?
No, I think we've buried it pretty good.
Okay.
Well, really quickly, the evidence that we covered today is just a really small fraction of the entire body of evidence.
Totally.
And we could probably go on for 12 hours and not cover it all. I had several more points in my notes that we could have talked about, and that's how this goes. I mean, once you dig into this topic, man, it's overwhelming, like you said, Bob. And when you have this preponderance of evidence that all points to a flat, stationary Earth and completely goes against the notion of a spinning ball Earth, at some point you really have to concede that there may be something to this, at least for argument's sake, so that you can perform tests, experiments, because otherwise, if you refuse to test this hypothesis, if you refuse to consider it, then you're actually the opposite of a scientist, and you'll never understand the truth.
Yep. Absolutely true. And I think I have never said the word Dave so many times in my life as I have today. So thank you, Dave.
Well, at least it's not in triplicate. Man, that would have been overwhelming.
Right. Anyway, but, in all seriousness, Dave, all we're asking is that people need to take a look at this evidence. People have questions. We've got answers. We want people to listen to us. We want people to take this into consideration, and you'll find that most people, that when they seriously consider this, and they go out and they try to debunk it, they wind up becoming flat earthers, or at the very least, they wind up seriously doubting that what the government is telling us, and as they should, because the government certainly is not any friend of the people, and we know that. We are being censored every way but Sunday, ridiculed. We have armies of trolls that are hired out to try and discredit us. I mean, it's unbelievable. And anybody that cannot see this, just the effort to censor us alone should raise a lot of red flags for a lot of people. In fact, you guys may have seen that one video where the guy is coming out saying, I never gave Flat Earth even a second consideration until I saw the unbelievable propaganda that was going against it, right? And that alone is causing people to really start looking at stuff. You may have heard, Dave, about the Behind the Curve movie where Jern and I were terribly misrepresented, and the rest of the story about the fiber optic gyro was not told. It was purposely left out. Okay. And Jern's curvature test was spliced dead in the center to give the implication that he had detected curvature. Absolute lies. Then we had the Logan Paul piece, and this is great, guys. I don't know if you knew this or not, but Jake Paul, and this is just kind of a side note, Jake Paul used to do a show called Bizaardvark, and it was produced by guess who? Disney. So, and Logan Paul was also part of Bizaardvark, right? So what I'm saying is when you look into this a little bit, you find out that Walt Disney and the Paul brothers, they're Disney kids. They are MK Disney kids. Gee, what a surprise, right? But that's something that I'm just mentioning in passing. But for all you flat earthers out there that are interested in this stuff, go take a look at this. Just Google Bizaardvark Logan Paul, and you will see some pretty eye-opening stuff as to why this is happening. Of course, Disney is one of the main progenitors of this propaganda. Disney and NASA have been hand in hand for decades. Disney is the propaganda arm. NASA is the movie studio producer arm, and they are quite effective in brainwashing people. So just something else to look at, guys. So, all right. So I guess we're going to call that a show because it's, we've gone on and on. We've probably given Dave way too much time. But like I said, the reason we did this is because these objections of yours, Dave, are very common from ignorant people that simply have not looked into it, that are content to believe that flat earthers are idiots and that we are not discerning and we are not logical and we are not intelligent, whatever. When in fact quite the opposite is true. And I'm not saying that there aren't really stupid flat earthers out there, because Lord knows there are, but there are also a lot of really stupid globe earthers out there. And it's not even that, it's most people's fault for being stupid. It's the reason that people are in this mess is because we have all gone through the same indoctrination system that they call the educational system. All right. And if you're really a professor, Dave, and you really have a PhD, then you are one of the most brainwashed people there are out there. It's as simple as that. Drop the ego, use your head that got you that professorship, and really start looking at what, we've presented. And like I said, there's going to be 1 billion links below this show. And I think it would do you well to actually look at them. So any other advice for our professor friend, guys?
Open your mind. That's about it.
There you go. Okay.
Remove the globe-colored glasses.
There you go.
All right, beautiful. And by the way, for those of you that are wondering what happened to Mike Kavanaugh, he had a little one. Of course, they have a brand new one, and he was being quite fussy, and so he had to bow out. So he'll probably join us on another episode of Globebusters. But, for that, I guess we're going to call that a show, and I will go ahead and go around one last time. And Morgal, I know that you also did your own rebuttal of this, which was just posted a few hours ago. I would encourage people to go check that out. But other than that, what else you got coming up, sir?
Always working on something. Yeah, I just released that today. Didn't cover nearly as many points as we covered today, but I think there are a few unique things, and it's a little bit more compressed, more bite-sized. I mean, for me at least, 40 minutes or so. But yeah, and I don't put out these sort of videos to embarrass anybody or to attack Professor Dave. Really, my goal is to wake people up to this, and the best way to do that is to just present them with facts. And so that's what I tried to do. Hopefully he'll take a look at it. Hopefully he watched this whole show, because I think we made several good points that you can't just simply ignore. You can't continue to say you don't understand physics and change the subject. That's not going to work. But yeah, awesome show, guys. Thanks so much to the live audience for hanging out with us. Love you guys, and stay flat.
All right, good deal. And by the way, Dave, just one other thing is you may have noticed this. This is another one of those phony baloney things. Here we're showing, this was supposedly imaged by, not Himwari, but Epic, I think. I don't remember who did this. But it shows the eclipse going across the face of the Earth. Of course, the first thing that is obvious is the moon is conspicuously missing. And then, of course, the other ones that we have is the moon going across, which casts no shadow, and also... the clouds don't ever move or anything like that. And you wonder why we call these things fake, Dave? I mean, come on, where's the cloud motion in this? This has to represent, look at the way that the Earth is turning, and yet the clouds are not changing at all. Again, we didn't even touch the NASA fakery, nor did we really address the eclipse. But, in a nutshell, a couple of the things is, like I said, the size of the shadow. For the moon, only casting a 70-mile wide umbra is preposterous. The geometry does not work out for that, regardless of what you say. Like I said, if we had more time today, I would cover that. But we've covered it before, and it will be in the show link. So other than that, Jaron, you had a great video last night that you rolled out, which was beautiful. But what else you got coming up, or you want to talk about that?
No, just a thanks to all the listeners and those in chat. Appreciate it. Yeah, just keep an eye on my channel, because you never know when I'll strike up a live stream like I did last night. But to Professor Dave, I just have to look at it as, even if you believe in the moon landings, and I'm sure you do, then even that the last person to take an image, a photograph of the sphere Earth, was 1972. And once people come to realize that the moon landings are a fraud and it is a a hoax that's been perpetrated for 50 years, then they're going to start asking the question is, why is no one taking a picture of the sphere Earth? And that's where we get. And it's going to take you a while because you're going to have to get there first, and I don't expect that to happen for you, but at least you can open your mind and think about it. And if you decide to go back to believing you're on a spinning space rock flying through outer space at 1.5 million miles per hour, and you'll never feel it and you can't feel it, and just keep believing in whatever you read in those books, and I guess keep teaching the children that, and we'll try and teach them to have a little bit of critical thinking so that they can combat what is clearly propaganda and indoctrination. So that's it for me. And then, just a reminder to everyone that my Jeranism Raw show, which is on TFR, will not be simulcast on my YouTube channel starting tomorrow. So you can find that on TFR, or you can find it at Ginger Sugarbush 905's channel if he decides to simulcast that. But that's just so we can go back to what Jeranism Raw was originally, which was a place that I didn't have to worry about YouTube censorship. So look for that tomorrow evening, and that's at tfrlive.com. Just click the Listen Live button at 6 p.m. Pacific time.
All right, beautiful. Okay, and I think that's about it. Again, sorry guys for the beginning of the show, but again, YouTube keeps changing these things, like disabling the mute button so you can't mute it before it starts. And in this case, it happened in Creator Studio, and I'm like going, where is this going on? But I will not make that mistake again.
They really ruined that, didn't they?
Oh, man, they really, our intro got blown to heck, but it was kind of interesting.
I mean the Creator Studio, like that. They changed the user interface, and luckily I can still go into Classic, but it forces me into this new version of the user interface every time I log in, and it's it's a pain.
Yeah, the new one is no fun.
I hate it. Yes, and like I said, and not to mention it's turning on and off things that never used to be there before. So, but now I know, and hopefully won't make that mistake again. But it seems like it's always something. So anyway, all right, guys. Well, that's it then. We will see you next week, and keep waking people up out there, and we'll try to do the same. So until next week, be good to each other. Don't lie to each other. Open your mind. There is truth inside. Peace out, everybody.
Peace.
Peace, y'all.